Somewhere beneath the dust of every ruined hallway and forgotten terminal, Fallout hides a world of details that were never meant to matter. The wasteland carries within it hundreds of small decisions, odd accidents, and quiet absurdities that exist only at the edges of memory, things the world never asked for and never quite forgot. Tonight, we drift through those edges, through the small and the strange and the wonderfully pointless. Before you settle in, maybe tap subscribe for more calm stories and share where in the world you're watching from tonight. There is a bottle found across several Fallout titles, a glowing variant of Nuka-Cola known as Nuka-Cola Quartz that casts a faint light in otherwise complete darkness. Most players assume this glow comes from some form of residual radiation, the same kind that colors the world a sick green and hums from every cracked barrel in the capital wasteland. The truth is quieter and more accidental than that. The developers, during the construction of the Nuka-Cola Quartz model, mistakenly applied a light-emitting texture that had originally been designed for energy weapons, specifically for the tip of a laser pistol's barrel. The texture was never meant to be attached to a beverage. When the error was noticed, the decision had already been made to leave it. No one corrected the glow because no one needed to. The bottle lit up, and that was charming enough. It has no special use in gameplay. It restores health no differently than any other Nuka variant. It offers no bonus, triggers no hidden quest, and unlocks no achievement. Yet players across the series have discovered these bottles and treated them with quiet reverence, tucking them into storage boxes and display shelves as though they were fragile relics from before the war. Something about that accidental glow made the item feel sacred, even though the glow itself was an error. Fallout has always been like this, a world where mistakes are taken seriously and accidents become traditions. When developers built the neighborhoods of Fallout 3, they needed to fill the shelves of ruined homes with something. The answer, for reasons no one planned too carefully, was books. Pre-war books appeared across the capital wasteland in enormous numbers, stacked on counters, balanced on toilet tanks, wedged inside ovens, and occasionally half buried beneath collapsed ceilings. The placement was not intentional storytelling. According to early interviews with members of the team, item distribution in many areas was partially randomized during the generation of each map cell. Books, like many clutter items, were assigned to a general pool of objects that could appear in residential spaces, and the algorithm simply placed them wherever it found room. The result was a world in which citizens of the old America apparently kept their reading materials in their ovens. Players discovered novels beside sinks, inside display cases normally reserved for weapons, and stacked beneath bathroom vanities. Rather than seeing this as an oversight, the community built an entire interpretation around it. Some fans theorized that the scattered placement of books was an intentional commentary on a society that prized the appearance of intellectualism, but never truly engaged with it. Others imagined desperate vault dwellers or refugees hiding their libraries in the safest spaces they could find before the bombs fell. A simple randomization error became a quiet piece of the lore, absorbed into the fiction it was never meant to create. It is one of the defining qualities of this series. The world is so thorough in its atmosphere, so committed to its quiet melancholy, that even accidents feel intentional. Players arrive ready to find meaning, and meaning appears in a book beside a toilet, in a glow that was never supposed to exist, in details that no designer planned, but every fan remembers. The cleaning products of Fallout tell their own small story. A Braxo cleaner, one of the most common junk items across the entire series, appears in nearly every ruined building and abandoned home. What most players never notice is that the box design changes slightly between games. The logo shifts, the slogan adjusts. In Fallout New Vegas, the label reads a line so perfectly suited to the wasteland that it sounds intentional, even though it was written as a gentle joke between the development team. The box promises, in small, cheerful text, to eliminate germs the user never knew existed. In a world where no one has concerned themselves with sanitation in over 2 centuries, this promise is delivered with absolute sincerity. The Abraxo box never runs out of things to say. In later games, the label shifts again. Slightly different fonts, slightly different colors, slightly different advice for a world that no longer has running water to rinse with. The boxes pile up in ruined kitchens, tipped against cracked walls, stacked in pantries where the food has long since turned to dust. They are among the most abundant items in every Fallout inventory and among the least useful. Players collect them for their small scrap value. They are cleaned away from workbenches to make room for more important things. And yet they persist. Every title, every region, every crumbled building finds another Abraxo box waiting on a shelf. There is something comforting about that consistency. A pre-war product that survived the apocalypse, not because it was essential, but because it was everywhere. A cleaner with no one left to clean, still waiting patiently in the ruins, reminding anyone who passes that the world once worried about germs. The pre-war money scattered across the wasteland is perhaps the greatest example of value existing purely because someone decided it should. Paper currency from before the Great War can be found in wallets, desk drawers, open safes, and scattered across floors as though the owner dropped it on their way out. It weighs essentially nothing. It occupies inventory space. Its primary purpose is as a crafting material. A small amount of fiber gathered from old bills contributes to textile crafting in later games. Its secondary purpose is something rarer and more interesting than that. People trade it, merchants accept it, not because it has any practical backing. There is no government, no bank, no institution supporting its worth, but simply because collectors decided it was worth something, and enough people agreed that the agreement stuck. This mirrors, in its small way, how pre-war money functioned before the bombs. Then, too, its worth was a shared agreement rather than a physical fact. The paper became valuable when enough people believed it was, and it lost that value when belief collapsed along with everything else. In the wasteland, belief has crept back in a modest form. A few traders, a few collectors, and suddenly the old bills circulate again at the edges of commerce. It changes nothing in the larger economy. Bottle caps remain the true currency of the wasteland, but pre-war money drifts through the ruins like a ghost of the old financial system, quietly persistent, numerically meaningless, and somehow still accepted. The apocalypse did not fully kill money. It only changed the denomination. Nuka-Cola bottle caps, the standard currency of the post-war wasteland, are not as consistent as they first appear. Players who study them across multiple Fallout titles will find that the caps change in small ways between games. In Fallout 3, the caps carry a certain rim thickness. By Fallout 4, that rim is slightly heavier, a barely perceptible change that most players never notice unless one is placed directly beside the other for comparison. In Fallout 76, the decorative pattern pressed around the outer edge of each cap is reversed, a mirror image of the design used in earlier titles. None of these changes affect gameplay. The cap bends the same way regardless of its year of manufacture. The most likely explanation is a simple model redesign during the transition between games, an artist updating the asset without worrying about continuity, since the differences are too small to matter. But in a community trained to look for meaning in everything, this small inconsistency generated its own mythology. Certain fans began theorizing that different cap designs indicated different pre-war bottling facilities. Some argued that Nuka-Cola operated multiple regional factories, each producing slightly different caps, and that the surviving caps in each game reflected which factory's territory the player was exploring. The developers never confirmed this. The variation most likely had no lore significance at all, but the theory persists, quietly, in corners of the community, a conspiracy built entirely from the gap between rim thicknesses that no one was ever supposed to notice. In Little Lamplight, the underground community of children found in Fallout 3, a boy can be overheard during idle conversation, stating that he intends to become president one day. He says it with the casual confidence of someone who has not yet learned that the presidency dissolved with the nation that held it. Players who hear this line for the first time might file it away as charming, the ambition of a child who has not yet fully understood what the world outside his cave looks like. If those same players return after completing the main quest line, after the purifier has been activated, after the battle at Project Purity has concluded, after the capital wasteland has changed, they will find the same boy in the same spot. He never leaves Little Lamplight. He never grows up. The game's engine does not age its characters in ways that reflect the passage of time. He stands in the cave still saying what he always said, ambitions intact, unaware that the quest whose resolution might have changed his world has already happened somewhere out beyond his walls. He will be president one day. He will be president forever. He will never leave the cave. There is something quietly melancholy about this detail. Fallout is full of frozen moments, characters preserved at a single point in time, repeating their designated lines in a loop, while the world moves and changes around them without their participation. The boy's ambition serves as a small illustration of this. The wasteland is not a place where most things change. It is a place where most things simply persist. In Fallout New Vegas, a traveler found near Camp McCarran mentions almost in passing that he collects bottle caps shaped like stars. He delivers this information as small talk, the kind of detail that a stranger might share while waiting out a rest stop, a minor personal fact to fill the silence. In most playthroughs, no one follows up with him. He is a random settler with a hobby, which is already more personality than many background characters receive. The detail is more significant than it first appears. The Sunset Sarsaparilla Starcap mystery, the quest line in which a rare variant of the popular soda comes with a special bottle cap bearing a star, and collecting enough of them unlocks a hidden prize, runs quietly beneath the entire New Vegas experience. The settler's casual mention of star caps is a foreshadowing of that mystery, placed in an environment where most players will never connect the two. He knows something about the caps. He has probably been collecting them for reasons he cannot quite explain. He mentions this once to anyone willing to listen, and then the conversation moves on, and he is never referenced in the questline at all. Fallout. New Vegas is full of these small premonitions, background characters who touch the edges of quests they will never appear in, dialogue lines that brush against secrets without revealing them. The settler with his star cap collection stands as a symbol of that layered approach. He hints at something larger without committing to it, and then the wasteland moves on, as the wasteland always does. The skeletons scattered across the Commonwealth in Fallout 4 are among the game's most intentional decorations and its most accidental ones, often at the same time. Many are deliberately posed. A last embraced couple in a bathtub, a scientist slumped across a terminal with one hand still near the keyboard, a guard curled at the base of a locked door as if the locked door was the last thing they ever wanted. These are the intentional ones, small environmental stories told entirely through bone arrangement and context. Others are not intentional at all. Some skeletons appear upside down on couches. Some are wedged inside refrigerators at angles that no human body could have naturally achieved. Some hover slightly above their surfaces. These positions happened because Fallout 4's physics engine occasionally placed objects incorrectly when first loading a cell, and skeletal models, with their many individual bone segments, were particularly susceptible to this kind of displacement. When a skeleton loaded improperly, it sometimes ended up at an angle inside an object or in a pose that made no physical sense. Several developers have acknowledged, in interviews and in community discussions over the years, that a number of these accidental skeletons were noticed during testing and deliberately kept. Some of them were funny. Some of them looked like something that could be mistaken for intentional storytelling. Others were simply too strange to delete. Players, discovering them during exploration, naturally assumed the unusual poses were hints at hidden quests or environmental secrets. Most of them were accidents that outlasted the impulse to correct them. The line between accident and intention runs thin in the Commonwealth. The Pip-Boy, that heavy, beloved wrist-mounted computer that every protagonist carries across every Fallout title, hides its own set of small and useless details within its green-lit interface. Most players treat it as a tool, a map, an inventory manager, a radio, a stat tracker. They look at what it says and rarely at how it behaves. But the Pip-Boy behaves, slightly, in ways that no one asked it to. In Fallout 4, the screen adjusts its brightness in response to direct sunlight. When the player steps into the open Commonwealth and faces the sun at a low angle, the Pip-Boy's display dims very slightly, as though calibrating against the ambient brightness. The change is subtle enough that most players never notice it even across dozens of hours of play. It serves no functional purpose. The screen remains perfectly readable regardless. But it was implemented by a programmer who wanted the device to feel like something old and mechanical, something that was doing its best under conditions it was designed for 200 years ago. The radiation meter on the Pip-Boy occasionally ticks upward even in areas with no detectable radiation, a behavior meant to simulate the imperfect circuitry of aging equipment. Real Geiger counters, built in the middle of the 20th century, occasionally produced false readings from background electromagnetic interference, and the Pip-Boy's designers built that same imperfection into their fictional device. In Fallout 4, the radio function sometimes cuts to static without an apparent cause. The world feels less predictable because of it. The Pip-Boy feels less like a prop and more like something trying to survive. In Fallout 76, the two-headed cattle, known as Brahmin, always face north when they are standing idle. This is not a piece of lore. No in-game document explains it. No character references it. The behavior is the result of a navigation bug inherited from earlier versions of the Bethesda game engine, a quirk in how idle NPC positioning worked when characters had no active destination. The engine defaulted to aligning certain creature models toward a fixed compass direction, and Brahmin were among those affected. When this was discovered by players, the community initially treated it with the seriousness that the Fallout community tends to bring to everything. Theories were constructed. Some argued it represented a sensitivity to magnetic fields that two-headed animals might develop as a mutation. Others suggested that pre-war agriculture had programmed their ancestors to face certain directions for reasons long since lost. The developers eventually clarified that it was simply an unintended byproduct of how the AI system handled idle states. Their response to this discovery was to leave the bug entirely in place, with the stated reasoning that the cows had developed a preference for north, and that seemed fine. The Brahmin of Appalachia continued to face north. There is something almost peaceful about knowing this, that somewhere in a ruined world, through radiation and collapse and centuries of mutation, a two-headed cow has found its preferred direction and stays committed to it. Beneath certain campfires in Fallout 4, mole rats tunnel endlessly without ever emerging. These creatures spawn in burrows positioned underground near heat sources, a behavior inherited from the creature's design as an ambush predator that detects surface activity through vibration and warmth. However, in areas where the surface terrain was too dense for the mole rat spawn points to properly place the creatures above ground, the animals simply tunneled continuously beneath the player's feet, technically present and technically hostile, but invisible in every meaningful sense. The game registers them as enemies. When they are present, the player is technically in combat, that small tension at the edge of awareness that comes from knowing something nearby wants to cause harm. Except nothing is visible, the threat is entirely underground. Players who notice the combat indicator without any apparent enemy sometimes stand still, confused, waiting for something to appear. Nothing does. The mole rats dig in their perpetual circles. Eventually, the player moves away, the combat indicator fades, and the mole rats continue their invisible loops beneath the surface of a world that forgot them. This might be one of the more accidental metaphors in the entire series, an enemy that exists below the surface, causing tension without ever being seen. In a game about a world where the most significant threats came not from what was visible, but from what had been building quietly underground for decades before the bombs fell. The Nuka World expansion in Fallout 4 is, among other things, an elaborate collection of developer humor pressed into the walls of an abandoned amusement park. Inside the Galactic Zone, the space-themed section of the park, display cases hold toy rockets labeled with the names of fictional science fiction companies. These companies exist nowhere else in the Fallout universe. They appear only on these small rockets in this particular display as brief nameless inventions that someone on the environment team created for a single afternoon's worth of decorating. A terminal beside the cases contains references to corporate mergers that would make no sense even in the exaggerated corporate world of pre-war America. Among them is a merger between Robco Industries, the real and well-documented manufacturer of the Pip-Boy and numerous robotic systems, and a company identified only as Stellar Shoes. The note about the merger is written in the formal language of a press release, full of optimistic language about synergies and shared vision. It concludes that both brands are excited to bring footwear and advanced robotics together into a new era of consumer satisfaction. This was not an accident. It was placed deliberately by a writer who found the combination amusing and trusted that at least a handful of players would crouch beside this terminal in an abandoned space-themed amusement park and read to the end. In the same building, one of the ventilation shafts produces a hum at a frequency that matches the opening notes of the Nuka-Cola jingle, the cheerful, synthetic theme that has accompanied the beverage brand across every game in the series. The match is close enough to be identifiable, but requires several seconds of careful listening to confirm. Most players walk past it without noticing. Those who do notice it and linger find themselves in a post-apocalyptic theme park listening to a corporate jingle played by old ductwork, which is either melancholy or charming depending on the hour. The bloatfly is one of Fallout's oldest creatures, a large mutated insect that appears across nearly every installment in the series, buzzing aggressively and launching spine-like projectiles at anyone who disturbs it. What most players do not know is that the creature's wings beat at a speed that the game's physics model cannot realistically accommodate. A bloatfly the size of a small dog, with wings the span of a hand, would need to move those wings far more slowly to maintain the kind of flight its body weight implies. The animation is dramatically faster than it should be by any mechanical logic. According to internal documentation from the Fallout 3 development period, this was intentional. The animation team made a deliberate decision to exaggerate the wing speed because a realistically paced bloatfly did not feel threatening enough. At biologically accurate speed, the insect looked awkward. At the accelerated pace, it became unsettling. Something that moved slightly wrong, slightly too fast, in a way that the eye caught without quite understanding why. That discomfort was the goal. The decision carried through every subsequent game, unquestioned. Across multiple sequels and multiple engine updates, the bloatfly continued to beat its wings in defiance of any reasonable physics, and no one ever corrected it because no one needed to. The discomfort remained useful. The Deathclaw is one of the most recognizable creatures in the Fallout universe, a large, lizard-like mutant that has served as the series' primary symbol of overwhelming danger since the earliest games. In Fallout 4, the creature's iconic roar was assembled in a sound design studio from 3 separate recordings. The first was a lion's vocalization, selected for its deep resonance. The second was the low bellowing of an alligator in distress. The third was a slowed-down version of both, processed through digital filters until the combined sound had the particular hollow, enormous quality that the Deathclaw's visual scale demanded. The result was slowed by 80% from its original composite recording before final implementation. Players who encounter a Deathclaw at close range hear this sound and feel it in a way that a more ordinary creature sound would not produce. It occupies the low end of the hearing range in a way that registers as threat rather than simply noise. The sound team spent considerable time on it, and the care shows what is less expected is the discovery, made by players through experimentation, that a Deathclaw can be distracted by the placement of a teddy bear on the ground nearby. The creature, upon detecting the toy, will pause its aggression and briefly redirect its attention toward the object. This was not a designed feature. It emerged from the creature AI system for investigating small physics objects, which treated any suddenly introduced item as a potential point of interest. No one added teddy bears as Deathclaw distractors intentionally. The mechanic works entirely by accident. The Deathclaw, the great predator of the wasteland, is for a moment curious about a toy. Fallout's food items carry their descriptions the way old product labels carry fine print, with complete sincerity about things that no longer apply. The Fancy Lad snack cakes found in Fallout New Vegas list a calorie count of 0 across every box. This was clearly written as a joke by a developer who enjoyed the idea of a centuries-old pastry making health-conscious promises on its packaging. The cakes have been sitting in their packaging since before the war, and they are still, technically, fat-free. Sugar Bombs cereal, found in homes and stores across every Fallout title, carries box art featuring cheerful pre-war mascots and, on the back, a description of itself as part of a balanced apocalypse. This was not caught by anyone who might have removed it before the game shipped, which suggests either that no one read the back of the Sugar Bombs box during final review, or that several people read it and found it acceptable. Either way, it shipped. It is there, on every Sugar Bombs box, in every ruined pantry across the capital wasteland. The Salisbury steak is perhaps the most interesting case. This shelf-stable meal in a can appears in every major Fallout game. Its ingredient list changes between titles in a direction that grows progressively less informative about its contents. In Fallout 3, the label claims it contains beef, a straightforward, if unverifiable, assertion. In Fallout 4, the ingredient list has been simplified to the phrase meat product, which raises more questions than it answers. By Fallout 76, the label on the can reads only edible material. 2 centuries of nuclear fallout apparently affected not only the food itself, but the honesty of those describing it. The sound design team behind Fallout 4 embedded a number of small jokes into the game's audio that most players never discover. One of the more precisely constructed is hidden in the warning beep sequence of proximity mines, those small, flat, pressure-activated devices placed to catch unaware players in raider camps and abandoned buildings. The beeping pattern that plays in the seconds before a mine detonates is not random. It is not simply a countdown noise designed to create urgency. According to sound engineers interviewed after the game's release, the beeping spells the word boom in Morse code, specifically the 4 dots and 3 dashes and 4 dots of the letters B, O, and M arranged in that sequence. No player notices this during normal gameplay. The beeping registers as a danger cue and triggers an immediate physical response. Sprint away, dive behind cover, stop moving. No one has the attention available to decode the sound into Morse code while it is happening, but the team built it in anyway. The joke exists for everyone and for no one at exactly the same time. A similar precision applies to the vault door opening sequences. The massive circular gear doors of each vault play a low-frequency hum as they begin to rotate, and that hum corresponds numerically to the vault being opened. For Vault 111, the vault where Fallout 4 begins, the pitch sequence contains one low tone followed by three higher tones, a sonic representation of the digits 1, 1, 1. This detail is completely undetectable during normal play. The scene is too dramatic, too full of other sounds and visual information for anyone to isolate the hum and work out its correspondence to the vault number. The team knew this. They included the detail anyway. In Fallout New Vegas, every pool table found in bars, rec rooms, and gambling spaces across the Mojave shares the same low-resolution model for its balls. From a normal distance, the balls appear numbered, their colors and numerical labels suggesting a functioning set of billiards equipment surviving from before the war. Zoomed in using certain camera angles, the resolution of the model breaks down and every ball becomes functionally identical. The numbers exist only at a distance sufficient to imply them. Up close, they are the same smooth, undifferentiated sphere repeated 16 times. This was a practical decision during development. The pool table was not a significant asset. It appears in the background of spaces where other things are happening, used as set dressing rather than an interactive element. Spending significant resources on the resolution of each individual ball would have been unnecessary. A lower resolution shared model served the functional purpose entirely well, but it produces a small, quiet strangeness when examined closely. The billiard balls of the wasteland are individualists from a distance and identical up close, like many things that look more complicated than they are when you get near enough to see them clearly. In Fallout 4, every broom in the game is labeled in its internal files as a cleaning sword. This terminology appears to have originated early in the asset's development when the object was first assigned tags in the game's system. At some point in the initial tagging process, someone, possibly because of how the item's physical form was categorized, applied the tag for sword category items to what would eventually become a broom. The tag carried forward through every subsequent version of the file. By the time the game shipped, every janitorial implement in the Commonwealth was technically a cleaning sword, and no one had ever gone back to correct the label. Many of the terminals scattered across the Fallout series share text files that were copied from earlier games in the series or from internal templates used across multiple projects. This recycling was a practical measure. Writing unique content for every terminal in every location would require an enormous amount of writer hours, and many terminals are found in spaces where the player is unlikely to stop and read. The result, however, is that occasionally a terminal will contain content that belongs to a different location entirely, referencing places, events, or organizations that have no connection to where the terminal physically stands. One such instance is a terminal in Fallout 4 that contains a reference to the Boneyard, the post-war name for Los Angeles, a significant location in the original Fallout game set in California. The Commonwealth where Fallout 4 takes place is in Massachusetts, several thousand miles away. The Boneyard has no meaningful connection to the events of Fallout 4 and would have no reasonable reason to appear in a Boston area terminal. The file was copied from an older source. The reference went unnoticed during editing, and it shipped as written. Rather than treating this as a continuity error, a portion of the community eventually absorbed it into their understanding of the lore. Some players argued that it represented the interconnectedness of pre-war data networks, that information from all across the country had been mirrored across regional servers before the bombs fell, and that this terminal simply retained a fragment of that distant digital world. The developers had made a practical copying decision. The community gave it a meaning that made the world feel larger and more connected than any single decision had intended. In every major Fallout game, at least one toilet survives in a state of complete, pristine functionality. Across entire buildings where every wall has crumbled, every piece of furniture has decayed or been dragged away, every window is shattered, and every surface is coated in 2 centuries of grime and radiation. The toilet survives. It is white. It is intact. It sometimes, implausibly, still functions. The explanation is both mundane and slightly endearing. Toilets, as game objects, were built using one of the most stable and optimized physics collision models in the Bethesda engine. The collision data was precise, the object was relatively simple in shape, and the result was a model that experienced far fewer physics problems than nearly anything else in the game world. It was structurally easier for the game engine to keep a toilet intact and properly placed than to simulate its destruction or deterioration. The porcelain endured not because porcelain is particularly indestructible in reality, but because the object's underlying code was among the cleanest in the entire game. Developers acknowledged this in various post-release discussions with the community, confirming that the toilet's survival was partly intentional, as set dressing as a small joke for observant players, and partly an organic consequence of which models were most stable under the engine. The toilet became a symbol. Players joke that the true survivor of the apocalypse is sanitary porcelain. The wasteland took everything else but left the bathroom fixtures standing. Beneath the pre-war corporate humor scattered throughout Fallout's world, certain government documents reference departments that seem designed to test the limits of bureaucratic naming. Internal memos found on terminals in various government facilities across the series mention divisions with names that suggest either extraordinary creativity or the complete abandonment of meaningful administration. There is, according to one entry, a division of non-essential morale. Another references an office of recreational hypocrisy. These departments are not connected to any quest. They do not appear again in any other document. They exist in a single terminal entry, assigned to no one and responsible for nothing. Monuments to the kind of institutional absurdity that Fallout has always used to describe the bureaucratic face of pre-war America. The humor in these details is gentle and observational rather than satirical or biting. Fallout has never been particularly interested in being angry about the old world. It is more interested in being quietly amused by it, in the way that one might be amused by reading the minutes of an extremely serious committee meeting about something completely unimportant. These department names carry that quality. They suggest a civilization that had perfected the organizational language of importance while gradually losing track of whether the important things were actually getting done. For all the tragedy built into Fallout's premise, the bombs, the vaults, the slow collapse of everything that people had built, there is always this other layer underneath, a layer that does not mourn the old world so much as gently shake its head at it. The Division of Non-Essential Morale filed its last report in 2077. No one remembers what they were in charge of. No one remembers what they accomplished. But someone wrote the name down, and it survived in a terminal entry, and players read it in the ruins of a civilization that apparently needed a dedicated office for recreational hypocrisy. When the player walks near a skeleton that happens to be holding a Nuka-Cola bottle, the bones sometimes produce a faint, glassy clink. This sound is not attached to the bottle. It is not a triggered audio event associated with the skeletal model. It comes from the joint between the skeleton's arm bones, a physics collision that occurs when the ragdoll of the skeleton shifts fractionally, as ragdoll objects occasionally do when the cell around them updates. The audio trigger was built into a shared physics object rather than assigned exclusively to the bottle, which meant that any movement in the joint, however slight, however accidental, could activate a sound associated with glass touching glass. The result is the impression that something is moving inside those bones, that a skeleton, seated in the ruin of a building that fell 200 years ago, is still occasionally sipping from its drink. Players who notice it and understand its cause do not necessarily find it any less affecting. It produces a feeling that has no clean name, something between amusement and a kind of gentle, imagined sadness. The wasteland's dead, it turns out, still reach for familiar things. The newspapers scattered across Boston in Fallout 4 each display a unique headline on their front page. The paper itself, when picked up, shows text in the columns below. But beyond the first few lines of that text, which contain actual content written by the game's writers, the remaining paragraphs are placeholder text. The filler language is lorem ipsum, the standard dummy text used in design and typography to fill space before real content is written. It has been used this way since the 16th century. In Fallout 4, it persists in the columns of every newspaper in a ruined Boston, repeating its meaningless Latin syllables across documents that the world has long since stopped caring about. Most players never zoom in close enough to read the body of a newspaper during normal play. The headline is readable, and the paper serves its function as set dressing, a reminder that people once woke up and read about the world before they went to work. But anyone who pauses and looks will find that beyond the surface, the news has already run out of words. The headlines remain. The content beneath them is empty syllables filling the space where information used to be. It is difficult to decide whether this is an accident or the most accurate thing in the game. In the files of Fallout New Vegas, there exist recorded voice lines for a Protectron robot who has developed the distinct impression that it is a lounge singer. The recordings, found by data miners in the years after the game's release, include spoken phrases delivered in the robot's characteristic flat, mechanical tone. Statements like initiating smooth jazz protocol and preparing to deliver ambient musical entertainment. The lines were recorded. They were assigned to a variant of the Protectron model that was designed and built to appear somewhere in the game. The location it was supposed to occupy was removed during the production process when the area it belonged to was cut from the final build. The Protectron stayed in the files, the voice lines stayed in the files. The lounge singing robot exists in the game's code as completely as any robot the player encounters during actual play. It simply never appears. It has never performed. It has never delivered its smooth jazz protocol to any audience. It waits in the data, intact and fully voiced, and deeply committed to its purpose, in a room that no longer exists in a game that shipped without it. The fact that no player will ever hear these lines during normal play makes them, by the definition established by this series, perfectly useless. And by that same quality, by existing as something built with care and left behind with no audience to appreciate it, they are among the most Fallout things in the entire Fallout universe. Some players once became convinced that the static patterns on Galaxy News Radio in Fallout 3 were hiding something. During storms, when the signal quality degraded and the broadcast was interrupted by long stretches of white noise, certain listeners believed they could hear structure in the static patterns that seemed to organize themselves into Morse code. The community devoted genuine effort to this possibility. Recordings were analyzed, frequencies were isolated, decoded sequences were compiled and compared, and some of them appeared to predict events in the game: character deaths, quest outcomes, shifts in the world state. The developers later confirmed that the static contained no intentional hidden message. The patterns were random noise generated by overlapping audio layers that produced the same kind of pseudo-structure that human pattern recognition reliably finds in any sufficiently long sequence of noise. The mind, trained to find meaning, found meaning in randomness and built theories around it. The important thing, the Fallout thing, is that the theories were more satisfying than the truth. In a game about a world full of real conspiracies, real hidden vaults, real secret agendas, and real lies buried beneath the surface of official history, a community learned to look for hidden meanings in everything. Some of those meanings exist. Some of them are noise. The skill required to find the real ones also finds the false ones, and the false ones are sometimes more interesting. In Fallout, myths are often more satisfying than truth. In Fallout 4's Creation Kit, the development tool used to build the game's world, which was released to the public after the game launched, every version of the player's canine companion Dogmeat carries the label Dogmeat version 7 in its model data. The number suggests that the dog went through at least 6 previous design iterations before arriving at the version that shipped with the game. This is not unusual in game development. Assets go through numerous revisions before being finalized, and older version numbers are sometimes left in file names as a matter of record, rather than because anyone intends for players to find them. But the number caught the attention of the community in the way that numbers in Fallout always do. Fans began imagining the missing 6 versions. What had Dogmeat looked like in version 1? Had version 3 been a different breed? Was version 5 closer to the concept art? Somewhere in the development history of Fallout 4, 6 digital dogs had been built and evaluated and set aside. None of them were good enough, or perhaps none of them felt right, until version 7 emerged with exactly the right combination of brown spots and devoted eyes to become the companion that the Commonwealth deserved. The number has no in-game significance. There is no quest that references it. No terminal contains a file explaining the earlier versions. It exists only in the underlying data, a casual record that a dog was built 6 times before it became itself. The pencil is perhaps the most philosophically significant useless object in the Fallout series. Found in every game since Fallout 3, pencils can be picked up, added to the player's inventory, and either carried until they are discarded or broken down into their component materials, a negligible quantity of scrap wood, and a small amount of lead. Their trade value is nearly zero. They weigh something, which in a game where carry weight is a real constraint, makes them a mild nuisance rather than a resource. They are everywhere. Every desk, every classroom, every government office, every storage shelf. The apocalypse occurred in the middle of a moment when pencils were being used or stored, or simply resting beside notebooks that no one will ever finish writing in. 200 years later, they remain. Some of them are still sharp. Some of them still have erasers. In a world where almost everything is either decayed, been destroyed, or been consumed, the pencil persists in quantities that suggest the old civilization was, above all else, prepared to write things down. Players have approached the pencil the way they approach most abundant useless items, by building structures out of them. Storage containers in player settlements have been filled entirely with pencils as a form of protest against inventory management. Towers of pencils have been constructed using the settlement building system, rising to heights the game's physics engine considers architecturally unsound. The pencil, given unlimited space and enough dedication, becomes monument rather than junk. This is the wasteland. Even the things with no purpose have one if you look at them long enough. The laser pistol in Fallout 4 produces one of the most recognizable sounds in the series, a bright, clean, futuristic burst that feels both powerful and precise. The sound was not recorded from anything that resembles a laser weapon, because laser weapons do not yet exist in the real world. It was built from 3 completely unrelated audio sources, layered and processed until they combined into something new. The first was the discharge sound of a camera flash capacitor. The second was the sound of a guitar string being plucked at high tension. The third was the metallic snap of a soda can tab being flicked. Sound engineers have confirmed that this combination was experimental. The team was trying different materials and found that the resulting layered sound had exactly the clean, energetic quality they were looking for. There was no specific reason why those 3 sounds should combine into something that felt like science fiction weaponry. They simply did, and the result was kept. The laser pistol of the Commonwealth fires music and photography equipment in a blend indistinguishable from technology that does not yet exist. This extends a truth about Fallout's sound design that runs through the entire series. The technology of the wasteland is built from creative decisions rather than scientific accuracy, and the sounds of that technology follow the same principle. Nothing sounds the way it would if it worked as described. Everything sounds the way it needs to in order to feel right. The laser pistol sounds like the future because 3 pieces of ordinary sound, combined by accident and left in place by choice, happen to feel that way. The mannequins that stand in Fallout 4's abandoned clothing stores, ruined boutiques, and collapsed shopping centers are classified internally as humanoid neutral, a category designation that places them in the same broad group as actual living characters rather than the object category that contains all other static props. This classification was applied because the mannequins use the same physical skeleton as humanoid characters, which allowed them to be positioned more flexibly during level design. It was a technical convenience rather than a philosophical statement. The consequence is that the game's combat system treats them as alive. When the player targets a mannequin, the system queries for health values, damage resistances, and faction data before determining that none exist and moving on. This query takes a fraction of a second and has no effect on anything the player experiences, but in certain lighting and physics conditions, the classification causes mannequins to trigger visual effects normally reserved for living beings. They can, under specific circumstances, produce impact responses that look like what happens when something alive gets hit. Players who discover this tend to find it unsettling, and not without reason. The wasteland already occupies a space between life and death. The ghouls who remember the old world, the synths who cannot be reliably distinguished from organic beings, the terminals that still speak in the voices of people long dead. A mannequin that the game's engine considers alive, however briefly and incorrectly, fits neatly into this tradition. Everything in the Commonwealth is almost something, almost human, almost functioning, almost enough. In Fallout 4, coffee cups weigh more than empty glass bottles, despite both being made of lightweight materials and serving comparable storage functions. This inconsistency has no explanation within the lore. It exists because the coffee cup model was originally created for a different project within the same game engine, a project that used different weight values as part of its own internal economy. When the model was brought into Fallout 4 during development, it carried those original weight values with it, and the values were never corrected to match the game's established system. As a result, the coffee mug sits in the inventory of every player character in the Commonwealth as a slightly more burdensome object than it has any right to be. It weighs more than it should. It contributes to carry weight in a way that bottles of similar size do not. This distinction matters only in the precise calculation of maximum carry capacity, and even then, only marginally. A coffee cup is not going to be the object that tips a character over their limit. But the inconsistency is there, persistent and uncorrected, in every copy of the game. Some players, upon learning this, developed a grudging fondness for it. The coffee cup of the wasteland carries more weight than its appearance suggests. This is, in its small way, a metaphor. The pre-war world was also full of things that seemed light until you tried to carry them. In the glowing sea, the most heavily irradiated region of the Commonwealth, located in what was once the southwestern suburbs of Boston, there is a skeleton lying beneath a pile of rocks with one arm extended, reaching forward. Players who encounter it tend to assume it is telling a story. The position suggests someone caught beneath debris, stretching toward help that never arrived, frozen in that last movement by the force of whatever buried them. The true origin of this skeleton is less dramatic. During development, this area contained a weapon, a specific item placed beneath the rock pile as a discoverable reward for exploring the most dangerous region of the game. When the weapon was removed in a later editing pass, the skeleton that had been positioned nearby to contextualize it was not removed along with it. The level artist who deleted the weapon did not delete the skeleton. The skeleton remained, still reaching for an item that no longer existed. For years after the game's release, players circulated theories about what the skeleton meant and who it had been. It looked too deliberate to be accidental. It looked like exactly the kind of environmental storytelling that Fallout 4 excelled at, a silent drama enacted entirely in bone and context. The truth that it was reaching for a deleted gun and had simply not been cleaned up afterward was discovered long after the theories had become part of the game's mythology. By that point, the skeleton had been given too many stories to give up its drama for the actual explanation. The robots of Fallout carry their own collection of behavioral accidents, Mr. Handy units The floating, spherical domestic robots found across the series occasionally mutter to themselves during idle periods when no player character is in their vicinity. One of their most consistent idle lines is a statement about needing to polish more surfaces, delivered in their crisp, old fashioned British accented voice, addressed to no one, in rooms where all the polishing was presumably finished 200 years ago. This line plays because the idle dialogue timer in the Mr. Handy AI does not check whether any tasks remain before triggering the relevant voice line. The system simply waits a certain amount of time and then plays a randomly selected idle phrase, regardless of whether the task referenced by that phrase has any connection to current circumstances. The result is a robot that has completed its work beyond any reasonable measure of completion and still announces its intention to do more. An eternal servant of a house that no longer needs serving, still committed, still announcing its protocols to empty hallways. Assaultron robots, the fast humanoid combat robots built for military applications, occasionally pause in the middle of combat to perform a brief calibration animation. This animation was originally designed for use in pre-war demonstration contexts, where an Assaultron would be shown to potential buyers or government officials and would perform a brief self-diagnostic as part of the presentation. The animation file was included in the Assaultron's overall behavior library and was assigned to a tag that could trigger in multiple contexts. The tag was applied incorrectly to certain combat situations, meaning that under specific conditions, an Assaultron will stop fighting, perform its demonstration calibration, and then resume its attack. It is a machine briefly remembering what it was built to show, rather than what it was built to do. Every major Fallout game contains the crash test dummy model used by the development team during physics testing. This model, a standard featureless figure designed to absorb and demonstrate collision impacts, was a working tool rather than an artistic asset, part of the internal infrastructure of development rather than anything intended for players to see. And yet, in each game, the dummy appears somewhere in the final map, hidden just outside normal player access, but findable by those willing to look. In Fallout New Vegas, the dummy floats beneath Hoover Dam, visible only through specific camera angles or console commands. In Fallout 4, it rests half-buried near a pre-war government test facility. In Fallout 76, it lies under a bridge, without collision data, passing through the ground slightly as though the world cannot quite decide what to do with it. In each case, the placement appears intentional, a team in-joke preserved through multiple games, a quiet signature left by developers who wanted to acknowledge that behind every ruined wall and carefully dressed environment was a testing process, and behind that process was a simple featureless figure absorbing imaginary impacts so the rest of the world could look the way it was supposed to. The crash test dummy has been called the true mascot of the Fallout development team, a witness to the creation of every simulated disaster present at the beginning of every world before the set dressing arrived, and still standing quietly in the corner of each finished product, noticed only by those who go looking. There are in-game clocks in Fallout 4 that have frozen at the exact moment of 9:47 in the morning, the time of the Great War, when the bombs fell on October 23rd, 2077. This is one of the series' most carefully maintained environmental details. Clocks stop at that moment because the electromagnetic pulse that accompanied the nuclear detonations disabled every electronic and mechanical system within range simultaneously. The frozen clocks are a reminder built into every interior space, a detail that grounds the catastrophe in something as ordinary as checking the time before a morning meeting. Within Diamond City, a handful of clocks still tick. Their hands move, they keep approximate time through the in-game day cycle. This continuity, which seems like it might represent the settlement's resilience or some functional aspect of their infrastructure, is actually neither of those things. The clocks that continue to tick in Diamond City do so because they were modeled as part of a pre-war interior cell, a template that included animated clock hands, and that template was imported into the Diamond City environment. without disabling the animation. The developers simply forgot to stop the clocks. The oversight remained. A few timepieces in the wasteland tick on, not because time never stopped there, but because someone forgot to freeze them. Players who noticed the discrepancy between the frozen clocks of the Commonwealth and the ticking ones of Diamond City have developed various explanations for why those particular clocks might still work. The theories are, as always, more interesting than the reality. The clocks tick because someone forgot. And yet, somehow, in a game about a civilization frozen in its last moment, a few clocks that continue forward feel like something more than an accident. In Fallout New Vegas, the dinosaur sculptures that flank the road in the small town of Novak are hollow. Their outsides are solid model geometry. The familiar shapes of a brontosaurus and a large bipedal dinosaur have existed at the roadside of that location since the Mojave Wasteland came into being. Their interiors, accessible only through console commands or mods, contain nothing. Empty geometry, floating texture fragments, and in one of the structures, a single invisible object labeled marker for fun. The marker was most likely placed by a developer during the construction of the interior space as a reference point, a target for testing line of sight calculations or trigger zones. It survived the development process unmarked, unnamed beyond that label, and unfindable during normal play. The marker for fun inside a hollow dinosaur in the Mojave has become a point of mild reverence among the community of players who know about it. Not because it means anything, but because something about it precisely defines what this category of trivia is: an invisible marker labeled for fun, inside a hollow dinosaur that no one was ever supposed to see. The Ink Spots recording of I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire plays during Fallout 3's opening. Over the title screen, introducing the world beneath a cascade of green light and the Pip-Boy's familiar glow. What most listeners do not know is that the version used in the game begins 2 seconds later than the original recording. The edit was made to better synchronize the song's vocal entry with the narrator's first words. A 2-second trim in a track recorded in 1941, used in a game released in 2008, adjusting the timing of a post-apocalyptic opening sequence for a few seconds of better narrative flow. The edit is undetectable to the vast majority of listeners. It requires direct comparison with the original recording to notice. The song feels complete. The opening feels right. 2 seconds of old world music were quietly removed, and no one missed them, which is either a testament to skilled editing or a reminder of how difficult it is to notice what was never there. In Fallout 4, the Diamond City radio station plays a version of Uranium Fever that concludes roughly 10 seconds before the original recording ends. The song fades out early, cutting off the final instrumental passage. The edit was made according to available information to create cleaner transitions between tracks in the station's rotation. The song ends just slightly before it was supposed to, in a city that survived just slightly beyond what any reasonable expectation would have allowed. There is a fitting quality to an incomplete song playing in an improbable place. The bottle cap economy of the wasteland is, by any economic analysis, philosophically incoherent. Caps have weight, a measurable in-game weight that affects carry capacity and is tracked by the inventory system. Yet trade within the game never accounts for this weight. A merchant who sells goods worth 500 caps receives those caps and experiences no change in their own carry burden. The player character drops 500 caps on a table during the animation of a successful trade, and those caps vanish without contributing to the table's physics load. When dropped in large quantities on the floor of a settlement, hundreds of caps form a pile that the game's physics engine treats as a single unified object, preventing them from dispersing naturally. This is, in the technical language of game development, a practical necessity. Simulating the individual weight and physics of several hundred small metal discs in real time across every trade interaction would consume processing resources for no meaningful gain in player experience. The economy's internal inconsistencies were accepted because correcting them would create more problems than they caused. But the result is that the wasteland's entire financial system rests invisibly on a physics glitch. The caps do not behave like the heavy metal objects they are described as being. They behave like an abstract representation of value, which is, of course, exactly what currency has always been. The bottle cap economy works the same way real economies have always worked, not because the tokens have the properties they seem to have, but because everyone involved agrees to behave as though they do. The glitch is not a bug. It is an accidental reproduction of how money functions in every economy that has ever existed. Every Fallout game hides the signatures of real people in its background textures. The posters hanging in Rivet City's corridors in Fallout 3 contain the signatures of members of the art team, blended into the paint and printing of the images in ways that are only legible upon close examination. The warning signs posted throughout the Corvega factory in Fallout 4 include phone numbers that, when treated as a numerical sequence, correspond to the release date of Fallout 3, October 28, 2008. The initial connection requires patience and the willingness to rearrange digits, but the correspondence exists. These details change nothing about the game, they affect no system, reward no player for finding them, and contribute nothing to any storyline. They are simply human fingerprints on the fiction, evidence that beneath every ruined wall and post-apocalyptic surface, real people made decisions and sometimes left their marks behind. In a game about what remains after everything else is gone, these signatures are themselves a kind of what remains. The bombs fell, the civilization collapsed, but one art team's names survived, pressed into the digital paint of posters in a floating aircraft carrier settlement, waiting for someone patient enough to stand close and look. Drinking from a toilet in every major Fallout game restores a small amount of health. This mechanic was implemented during early testing and was widely expected to be removed before the final game shipped. It was not removed. The reasoning, insofar as there was reasoning, appears to have been that the mechanic functioned correctly, harmed no essential system, and produced a small amount of amusement when players discovered it. The health restoration comes alongside a radiation penalty, which creates a genuine trade-off that makes it a real, if unappealing, choice in moments of genuine desperation. The mechanic works. It is also completely absurd. Both of these things are true simultaneously, which is a reasonable description of a significant portion of Fallout's design philosophy. Sunglasses in Fallout 4 provide a charisma bonus that applies indoors as readily as it does in full sunlight. The game's social stat system does not check lighting conditions when calculating the bonus provided by eyewear. A character wearing sunglasses in total darkness receives the same interpersonal confidence enhancement as a character wearing them under open sky. This is a technical simplification. Building a lighting-dependent modifier into the charisma system would add complexity for marginal realism gain. The result is a world where social confidence can be obtained from accessories, regardless of whether those accessories serve any functional purpose in the current environment. One could argue that this is an accurate reproduction of how sunglasses work in certain professional contexts. One could also argue it is simply a charisma buff that forgot to check for the sun. In Fallout 4, a handful of raider camps are defended by sandbag barricades that float slightly above the surface they should be resting on. The gap is small, only a few centimeters in most cases, but it is consistent, and it produces an effect that looks like the barricades have been placed on an invisible platform slightly above the ground. Players who notice them tend to circle around them, looking for the explanation. The explanation is gravity. Specifically, the gravity flag that should have been applied to these objects was never set after they were copied from an internal test cell. Early in Fallout 4's development, a section of the game map was built with zero gravity physics for testing physics object behavior. Sandbags from that test cell were copied into the live game environment. When an object is copied between cells, Certain properties reset to default values. Gravity, however, was not among the properties set to default in this case. The bags retained the zero gravity flag from the test cell and hung slightly above the ground in every final location they occupied. Raiders across the Commonwealth have built defensive positions on hovering sandbags. They do not appear to notice. The barricades provide the same cover from a position slightly above the ground as they would from a position on it. In a world where two-headed cattle always face north and bloatflies beat their wings too fast, hovering sandbags represent a relatively minor departure from expected physics. The Nuka-Cola quantum variant, recognizable by its bright blue glow, produces a lighting effect in Fallout 4 that does not behave like other light sources in the game. When a quantum bottle is placed near certain objects, particularly other bottles, certain pieces of furniture, or flat surfaces, the glow texture inverts rather than casting light outward in a normal radius. It creates a zone of what looks like negative light, a shadow brighter than the area around it, an illuminated darkness that occupies exactly the space where shadows should fall. The cause is an overlap between the glow texture and certain reflection shaders used by nearby surfaces. When the two systems interact in specific ways, the lighting calculation produces an output it was not designed to produce. Developers who noticed this effect considered correcting it and decided against it. Their stated reason was that it looked appropriately science fiction, a beverage with supposed radioactive properties that casts light in the wrong direction, aligned with the mystique that the Quantum brand had accumulated across the series. The accidental negative light has since been adopted by players as evidence of the drink's truly unusual energy, something so full of whatever made it blue that it inverts ordinary photon behavior in its immediate vicinity. The physics engine made an error. The community made it lore. The Blamco mac and cheese found in Fallout New Vegas carries a printed expiration date on its box. That date is 2009, roughly 70 years before the Great War, and more than 260 years before the events of the game. The mac and cheese boxes, scattered across the Mojave in vending machines and abandoned kitchens, have technically been expired for longer than the old world survived. They remain perfectly edible by in-game standards. The player character can consume them without consequence beyond their statistical effects. The expiration date was either not noticed during production or noticed and kept for the same reason that many of these details are kept, because it was funnier than the alternative. A box of macaroni and cheese that expired before the first personal computers existed, still sitting in a vending machine in a nuclear wasteland, still technically for sale. The apocalypse, by this accounting, is simply the most extreme version of a store that forgot to rotate its stock. In Fallout 4, snack cakes from vending machines respawn over time. The machines restock themselves on a timer, a practical game mechanic that ensures players do not permanently deplete resources from locations they visit frequently. Within the fiction, this respawning suggests the existence of an invisible supply chain that continues to operate restocking ruined vending machines across the Commonwealth at regular intervals. Players occasionally pause on this detail and find it either comforting or deeply inexplicable. The apocalypse came. The vending machines continued to receive shipments. The collectible magazines scattered across every Fallout game, when examined closely, contain interior text that was not written for each unique issue. The paragraphs inside open magazines, the body text of articles that can be glimpsed by players who stop to look, are repeating placeholder content. The same sentence blocks loop. Certain passages contain words that are not quite words, suggestions of language rather than language itself. Prices printed on covers in old pre-war currency were chosen by artists based on what looked correct rather than any economic calculation. A common cover price that appears across multiple magazine types in the series is 73 cents, a number selected by the artist's own account because it seemed plausible for a pre-war periodical and looked right in the font being used. The magazines never received a patch to update their prices for inflation. Their cover prices have remained static through every version of the game. In the Fallout universe, magazine prices never changed between the 1950s and 2077. This implies either remarkable price stability or a complete indifference to economics. Given everything else the pre-war era reveals about its priorities, the indifference to economics seems the more likely explanation. The code files of Fallout 4 contain developer comments embedded in scripts, annotations left by programmers explaining their decisions or noting things that needed attention. Data miners who explored these files after the game's release found comments that had never been intended for any audience beyond the person who wrote them. Among the recovered comments are the straightforward administrative instruction, "Do not delete," the urgently personal warning, "Todd will be angry," and the improbably specific note, "This door hates light." The door that hates light was presumably a door whose rendering behavior in the presence of certain light sources was causing persistent problems. The comment survived every revision of the file without being corrected or deleted. It shipped as written. Somewhere in the Commonwealth, there is a door that hates light, and the person responsible for it knew it and wrote it down and moved on. These comments are the graffiti of creation, the private language that people leave behind when they are building something in the company of other builders and are not expecting anyone else to read over their shoulders. They reveal a development process that was funny and frustrated and personal. The world of Fallout was built by people who left jokes in its walls, who named their problems with vivid imprecision, who argued with doors. In Fallout 3's Megaton, the settlement built around an undetonated atomic bomb in the center of Washington, D.C.'s ruins. There exists an invisible wall high above the city that cannot be seen through any normal means of play. Within that wall's surface, discoverable only through free camera tools or modifications that remove collision limits, there is a tiny texture reading made in Maryland. The phrase is too small to be legible at normal scale. It requires specific camera angles and technical tools to find. This was almost certainly placed by a developer as a test object, something to confirm that the invisible wall had been correctly positioned, or as a personal signature, the equivalent of an artist signing the back of a canvas that will never be turned over. The development team for Fallout 3 was primarily based in Maryland, and Bethesda Game Studios remains there. The hidden text is a declaration of origin, a small territorial marking left by the people who built this particular piece of the post-apocalyptic world. Fans who discovered it called it a digital relic. It is also, technically, exactly what it appears to be: a note from Maryland left inside a fictional ruin in a fictional Washington, readable only by those willing to go looking for invisible walls high above an irradiated settlement. The apocalypse, apparently, did not significantly displace its creators. In Fallout 76, a set of unused dialogue files for Mr. Handy Robots contains responses designed for a conversation topic that was apparently considered and then cut: weather. The unused lines are responses to players asking Mr. Handy for a weather forecast, rather than describing upcoming conditions in the standard helpful Mr. Handy manner. These lines process the question and arrive at something unexpected. One response acknowledges the request and then announces in the robot's precise enunciation, processing emotion. Another suggests that perhaps the rain reflects an inner state that the unit has been attempting to categorize. The lines were removed because they were too melancholy for the tone the development team was aiming for with the Mr. Handy character in Fallout 76. They remained in the game's files, attached to a conversation trigger that never activates, delivered in a voice that no player will hear during any normal playthrough. A robot experiencing weather-prompted existential sadness exists entirely in the unused audio of a game about a nuclear apocalypse, which may be the most Fallout sentence it is possible to construct. The fusion generators scattered across the wasteland each produce a constant hum. This is not a single recorded sound looped at the same pitch in every location. The sound team for Fallout 4 tuned the generator's hum frequencies to correspond to the geography of each region. Generators found in the mountains hum at slightly lower pitches than generators found near the coast. The difference between any two generators is small enough that most players will never isolate it, and the variation serves no function within the game's mechanics. The tuning was done because the team wanted the world to feel alive in its details, wanted a player who spent enough time in one region and then moved to another to feel at some barely articulable level that something about the ambient sound was different. The generators were one instrument in this ambient orchestra, playing their small parts in the background of an enormous ruined world. The coastal hum is higher, the mountain hum is lower. The sound team knew this, and no one asked them to do it, and they did it anyway, because the alternative was every generator humming at the same pitch, which would be correct, but would feel less like a world. The Geiger counter, the device that registers radiation levels in every Fallout title through its distinctive clicking, sounds the way it does because of bacon. The sound design team building the radiation indicator needed something that felt like static electricity and irregular ticking simultaneously, and they found that the sound of bacon frying, when processed through certain digital filters and slowed to a particular speed, produced exactly the crackling, irregular pattern they were looking for. The processed bacon sound was layered with other recordings to create the final Geiger counter audio that players have heard across decades of Fallout games. Players who heard this effect assumed it was sampled from actual Geiger counter recordings. Sound engineers working on the project confirmed that no actual Geiger counter was used. The sound of nuclear radiation in the Fallout universe is, at its core, the sound of someone's breakfast. The effect has been judged convincing enough to be reproduced in every subsequent game, meaning that across every installment in the series, the steady presence of the atomic age has been accompanied by the imperceptible ghost of cooking meat. The vault doors that seal every Vault-Tec shelter rotate in a single consistent direction. Every vault in every game opens the same way, the great gear-shaped door turning clockwise as the mechanism engages and the seal breaks. This consistency exists because during the development of Fallout 3, a single rotation direction was chosen for the animation and implemented across all vault door models simultaneously. The choice was made for animation simplicity rather than architectural logic. Fans eventually noticed that this uniformity was physically implausible. A vault door that opens inward by rotating clockwise would, in a different orientation, need to rotate counterclockwise to achieve the same functional result. Some vaults, based on their design and the direction their doors face, should logically open in the opposite direction. They do not. They all turn the same way, because making half of them turn differently would have required additional animation work for a detail that most players would never consciously register. The fans who identified this inconsistency made a joke of it. The Vault-Tec Corporation, famously committed to every appearance of order and safety while conducting secretly questionable social experiments on its residents, could not manage to design vault doors that opened correctly in every orientation. The doors were just doors. They just turned. Consistency, in Fallout as in much else, was more important than accuracy. Fallout's skyboxes contain one of the series' most difficult to discover details. During a blood moon, a specific atmospheric condition that appears occasionally in Fallout 4 and produces a reddened sky, the arrangement of visible stars in the sky texture changes. The stars do not shift to an entirely different pattern. They rearrange slightly over the course of the atmospheric event into a configuration that resembles, very roughly, from certain angles, the shape of the Vault-Tec logo. The effect lasts for a limited period of time before the stars return to their standard arrangement. A lighting artist on the team added this detail during late development, working independently on the sky system. The reasoning, according to accounts shared later, was a desire to create the impression that the vaults still watched over the world from somewhere high above it, that the institution that had promised safety and delivered something more complicated than safety had left its mark not only in concrete and steel, but in the architecture of the sky itself. The discovery of this detail requires specific conditions: the right weather state, the right time in the game's cycle, the right camera angle, and the specific knowledge of what to look for. Most players never see it. The stars arrange themselves into a vault logo above a ruined world, and then return to randomness, and the night goes on. In Fallout 3, there is a skeleton that lies in a ruined building with a journal beside it. The journal describes the person's final days with quiet dignity, the practical decisions, the fading hopes, the gradual acceptance. The journal is well written, the skeleton is thoughtfully positioned, and the scene is clearly intentional. This is the kind of environmental storytelling that Fallout does with great care. In the same general region, there is another skeleton that exists for no reason at all. It is tucked behind a filing cabinet, in a position that makes no physical sense. The angle at which the body would have had to fall to end up there is not possible under normal gravity. It is not telling a story. It is not part of any quest. It is simply there, in a position it arrived at through a physics glitch during the loading of the room, and no one removed it before the game shipped. Players who find both skeletons in the same session tend to treat them identically at first, pausing, looking, wondering what the story is. One was placed with great care to suggest a human experience. One arrived there by accident. They are both part of the world now. They are both, in their respective ways, real. The Silent Storm is an event that occurs in Fallout 76 with sufficient rarity that many players complete their time with the game without ever experiencing it. During this atmospheric glitch, the sky darkens to storm conditions, rain falls visibly across the landscape, and lightning illuminates the clouds. None of it produces sound. The rain is completely silent. The lightning flashes without thunder. The ambient sound that normally accompanies the environment drops away entirely, leaving a storm that exists only as image, weather that can be seen but not heard. This occurs because of a desynchronization between the game's weather visual system and its audio trigger system. Under certain server conditions, the visual storm state loads successfully, while the corresponding audio triggers fail to initialize. The result is a full visual storm with no audio counterpart, a brief dreamlike period during which the world looks dramatic and sounds like nothing at all. Players who encounter this event tend to stop moving. There is no reason to stop moving. The silent storm does nothing mechanically, but the instinct to be still in the sudden quiet is strong. And players stand in the rain that makes no sound and watch the lightning that makes no thunder, and the world is briefly as silent as it would be if no one were in it. A bug provides a few minutes of something that the game did not intend to offer and could not have designed as well even if it had tried. The plunger is one of Fallout 3's most abundant useless objects. Found in nearly every bathroom in the capital wasteland, the plunger can be picked up and added to the player's inventory at a weight cost that the game assigns with complete earnestness. It can be sold for a trivial amount of bottle caps. It cannot be crafted into anything. It cannot be used for any purpose in any quest. It can be dropped, thrown, and watched as it bounces off surfaces under the game's physics calculations. That is the full extent of its utility. Players discovered that the game engine could handle a significant number of plungers in a single location before performance began to degrade. This discovery led to the construction of plunger towers, collections of hundreds of the objects stacked in player settlements using the settlement building system, or simply piled in the open through repeated dropping. The towers reached heights that no architectural logic would support, bending and swaying under physics calculations that were never designed to handle the specific problem of 1,000 plungers occupying a common vertical space. These towers served no purpose. They were not part of any system. No achievement recognized them. No quest referenced them. They were built because players found the limit and then pushed it, and the plunger, this faithful, abundant, utterly purposeless survivor of the apocalypse, accommodated every experiment with structural loyalty. The apocalypse cannot destroy the plunger, neither can physics. It simply bends and continues. The fire extinguishers of Fallout 4 explode when shot, releasing a burst of white powder that obscures visibility for a short period. This is a tactically relevant mechanic. Players can use fire extinguishers to obscure the line of sight of enemies, or enemies can use them to do the same to the player. The explosion creates a brief but functional cloud of white particulate. That cloud is, texturally, snow. The particle effect used for the fire extinguisher burst was borrowed from the Skyrim engine, the previous major game produced by Bethesda's primary studio. In Skyrim, the same particle system was used for actual snowfall. When the particle was applied to the fire extinguisher in Fallout 4, it was assigned the available texture from the shared engine library rather than a newly created one. The snow particle looked enough like fire suppression powder to pass in the heat of most encounters. No one replaced it. Every time a fire extinguisher discharges in the Commonwealth, it briefly produces a winter weather event. The snow falls from a punctured red cylinder for a fraction of a second and then disperses as the particle's short lifespan concludes. In a game set in the ruins of a Massachusetts summer, it snows occasionally near hardware failures. The engine remembers a colder world. In the living rooms and hallways of Fallout 4's ruined homes, a particular painting appears frequently enough to become familiar. It depicts a pleasant pre-war scene, a family gathered outdoors, the composition cheerful, the colors warm in the way that pre-war imagery consistently was. The father in the painting holds a beverage. Most players register this as a glass of something generic. Players who zoom in closely, which requires significant patience and intentional effort, concede that the beverage is a Nuka-Cola bottle. The texture artist who designed this painting confirmed in a later interview that the inclusion was deliberate and simple. In the Fallout universe, Nuka-Cola was so deeply embedded in pre-war culture that any scene of a happy family enjoying a pleasant outdoor occasion would include it. The artist imagined that even in a painting meant to represent American domestic happiness at its most idealized, the father would be holding a Nuka-Cola, because that was what happiness looked like in that world. The detail appears in at least 10 reproductions of this painting across the game. Most players pass it every few hours of play without noticing. The father holds his Nuka-Cola and smiles at the viewer, and the painting repeats itself in ruined home after ruined home. A small, warm advertisement for a world that ended before anyone stopped buying what it was selling. The bloatflies of Fallout inherited, through a chain of decisions that no one fully intended, a behavioral code originally designed for a very different creature. Somewhere in the game's design history, a pre-war park area containing decorative butterflies was planned and subsequently removed from the final build. The butterflies had been given a simple behavior. They would turn toward any active sound source in their vicinity, hovering near radios, jukeboxes, and other music-producing objects as a form of ambient animation. The behavior was charming and felt right for decorative insects in a peaceful park. The park was cut. The butterflies were removed. The behavior code was not removed. It remained in the insect AI library and was eventually applied to bloatflies, the mutated aggressive flying insects that attack players across the wasteland. As a result, bloatflies exhibit an inexplicable preference for music sources. They drift toward active radios. They circle jukeboxes. In Fallout 4, the behavior was inherited by radroaches, the mutated cockroach enemies found in basements and tunnels, who have been observed gathering near gramophones. Somewhere in the capital wasteland, and the Mojave and the Commonwealth, and Appalachia, small swarms of mutated insects follow music. They were designed to attack and scavenge, and they do those things, but underneath those behaviors, a line of code still looks for something pleasant to move toward. The apocalypse did not remove the impulse to gather near something beautiful, it simply changed what gathered. The loading screen tips of Fallout 3 were written by different members of the development team working independently. This approach meant that the tips covered a wide range of topics and provided a variety of advice across hundreds of hours of play. It also meant that no single person compared all the tips for consistency before they shipped. Two tips, appearing within close proximity in the loading screen rotation, contradict each other directly. The first explains that drinking purified water removes radiation, which is accurate to the game's mechanics. The second states that all water in the wasteland contains trace radiation, which is also accurate to the game's mechanics. The contradiction is that the first tip presents purified water as a solution to radiation, while the second implies that even purified water cannot be entirely free of it. Both statements are supported by the game's systems. They cannot both be true in the way they are stated. They are both there. The coordination failure that produced this contradiction. Two writers on the same team, writing about the same mechanic, arriving at mutually exclusive conclusions, became a philosophical artifact within the game. Players who notice the contradiction during loading tend to think about it for longer than a loading screen tip should be thought about. The wasteland, it turns out, is uncertain about water. The people who built it were, too. Fallout 3 contains a random encounter involving two travelers arguing about the existence of alien life. The encounter was designed to be triggered at specific locations. Initially planned to occur only near the crashed UFO site found in the northwestern section of the capital wasteland, where the presence of alien equipment made the argument contextually relevant. The two travelers were meant to debate something they could almost see evidence of if they looked in the right direction. During production, the spawn coordinates for this encounter were copied into a general pool of random encounter data. The encounter pool draws from all coordinates simultaneously, placing encounters wherever the conditions match. The alien debate travelers now appear anywhere in the capital wasteland, in the middle of radiation zones, on rooftops, at the entrances to dungeon facilities, in the ruins of government buildings. They appear, debate the existence of aliens, and disappear. The location is always wrong. The conversation is always the same. Two people who should be standing near proof of the thing they are arguing about now wander the entire wasteland, having that argument in every wrong place. They are never closer to resolving it than they were at the beginning. The wasteland, generous with its absurdity, allows them to continue indefinitely. The skyboxes of Fallout carry their own hidden errors. During certain weather transitions in Fallout 4, the clouds briefly flash with faint grid patterns, a visual artifact of the lighting algorithm that divides the sky into processing segments. The flash lasts less than a single second and resembles something between ancient circuitry and a map grid. It has no meaning within the lore. It appears because of how the rendering system divides its calculations, not because anyone intended for the sky to look momentarily like a blueprint. Players who notice it tend to pause, unsure whether they have seen something or imagined it. Both options are, under the circumstances, equally valid. In Fallout New Vegas, a giant invisible cube floats above the strip. It is labeled in the game's internal files, Reflection Box Main, and its only purpose is to make nearby shiny surfaces reflect light at the correct angles. Without it, the neon signs and polished floors of the strip would not sparkle the way they are supposed to. It was designed as a technical utility, invisible by design, present only in function, never meant to be seen. The developers, however, forgot to remove its collision box. The cube is invisible, but solid. Players who discovered it using free camera tools or game modification gave it a name, the Invisible God. It hangs above the lights and chaos of the Mojave's last great entertainment district, making everything glitter, seen by almost no one, responsible for something beautiful. In Fallout 76, a particular toaster model carries a unique item description. When examined, it reads simply, "I used to be useful." The line was written by a designer during an internal testing phase, a small creative flourish added to a prop that would otherwise exist without comment. When asked about it later, the designer who wrote it identified it as his favorite object in the entire game. Not a weapon, not an armor set, not a meaningful narrative collectible. A toaster sitting in the ruins of Appalachia, declaring its obsolescence to anyone who stopped long enough to check its item entry. The line works because it is honest in a way that most objects in the wasteland are not. Most junk items simply exist. They do not comment on their existence. The toaster that says, "I used to be useful," is performing a form of self-awareness that the genre does not typically allow for its clutter objects. And yet, it fits perfectly. Every ruined kitchen in every Fallout game is full of objects that used to be useful: appliances, cleaning products, cooking tools, entertainment systems. The toaster just happens to be the one that knows it. In Fallout 4's terminals, fictional software version numbers for the Pip-Boy are listed in log entries. They progress in ascending order, each version number incrementally higher than the last, tracking what appears to be decades of steady technological improvement in the device's software. Then, without explanation, the sequence reverses. The final entry in the log lists a version number dramatically lower than the one that preceded it, jumping backward as though the software forgot where it had been. This was intentional. The backward jump was the developer's way of representing, in a small and entirely internal way, the broader theme of technological regression that defines Fallout's post-war world. The Pip-Boy got better for decades, and then the bombs fell, and then it started getting worse. The version number recorded that decline in the only way a version number can. The chairs of Fallout have a consistent and quietly funny problem. Every chair in every game uses the same sitting animation, the same angle of descent, the same settling of weight, the same final seated position. This consistency means that a character sitting in a tall bar stool appears to hover above it, while a character sitting in a low, flat stool appears to sink through it. The sitting animation establishes a fixed seated height that does not adjust for the dimensions of the actual object. Comfort in Fallout is a universal standard applied without regard to individual circumstance. Every seat is the same seat. Every sitting is the same sitting. The chair is a suggestion. In Fallout 76, the clipboards that appear on desks and countertops across Appalachia carry a texture detail that players never notice during normal movement. The paper surface of each clipboard is covered in handwritten text, scrawls in cursive that look like notes or lists from before the war. Data miners and players with close inspection mods discovered that this handwriting is not random marks. It contains names. The sound engineers who worked on Fallout 76 placed their signatures in the clipboard textures as a quiet form of credit, a way of existing in the game world without appearing in any official credits roll. Every clipboard in Appalachia is, invisibly, a collection of autographs. Certain raiders in Fallout 3 sleep through combat. They are placed in beds throughout raider camps and facilities, programmed with a rest state that covers the early hours of the in-game day. The problem is that their AI lacks a proper alert trigger for the sleep state. Sounds that would wake any alert NPC, explosions, gunshots, the voices of companions, do not reach them. They lie in their beds with their eyes closed while firefights happen in adjacent rooms. Players who discover these raiders typically stop fighting long enough to observe them, and the word peaceful appears in many accounts of this discovery. The sleeping raider found perfect stillness in a chaotic world, not through wisdom or detachment, but through a missing line of code. They are, through technical accident, at peace. The graffiti on the walls of Diamond City carries, in one quiet corner, a line that reads, "Drink water, idiot." The message was originally written by a developer as a private note to himself, a reminder placed somewhere he would see it during long working sessions at his desk, during which he would apparently forget to drink water. The note was placed as a texture element during the building of that particular area. It was never intended to ship as visible content in the final game. It shipped. The walls of the greatest settlement in the Commonwealth now carry a message of personal health advice directed at its creator, preserved for anyone who looks closely enough at the right corner of the right wall. The bottle caps of Fallout 3, examined at very close range, reveal a small inconsistency in their surface texture. The Nuka-Cola logo printed on each cap is standard across the Wasteland's currency, but certain areas of the metal show dents that appear in a consistent pattern across multiple caps. The pattern, when isolated, resembles a crude smiley face. This was not a design decision. A texture artist working on the cap model used an uneven brush tool during the creation of the worn metal effect, and the resulting mark, accidental, imprecise, vaguely cheerful, was applied across the template that generated every cap in the game. The Wasteland's entire currency supply carries the same tiny, unintentional expression of optimism on its face, pressed into every transaction, acknowledged by no one. In Far Harbor, the fog-covered island expansion of Fallout 4, the game's lighting engine occasionally amplifies certain reflections without a visible light source nearby. The effect appears on water surfaces as a brief, sourceless shimmer, as though light is reflecting off something that does not exist. The development team called this phenomenon ghost sunlight during internal testing, having identified its cause as ambient radiation lighting being processed through the fog layer in a way that produced spurious reflections. In a location already defined by mystery and tension, ghost sunlight looks intentional. Players who see it near certain locations associated with the island's more unsettling mythology have worked it into their interpretations of events. A rendering error became something stranger and more atmospheric than any deliberately placed environmental detail could have been. The mole rats of Fallout 4 carry within their vocalization files a sound that was never intentionally placed there. An audio designer, while recording and processing animal sounds for use in the game, accidentally captured a brief vocal sound of his own, a low, grumbling syllable produced while adjusting a microphone. This accidental recording was processed alongside the creature's sounds, modified, and incorporated into the mole rat's growl without being detected during the review process. The result is that somewhere within the layered vocalizations of Fallout 4's most common underground creature, a human voice is present, reversed and distorted. But there, every mole rat in the Commonwealth carries an echo of the person who built it. The power armor shadow in Fallout 4 flickers for a single frame when the armor is first equipped. A brief, barely perceptible darkness appears and disappears before the armor's full shadow loads correctly. The development team, during review, described this flicker as cinematic imperfection, a quality they associated with old film projection, where individual frames occasionally registered differently from the ones before and after them. Rather than correct the flicker, they kept it for this reason. Cinematic imperfection became, in an unplanned way, a description not just of a shadow glitch, but of the entire aesthetic philosophy that has guided Fallout's visual design across the series. The world looks worn and imperfect and slightly wrong. The shadow fits. The teddy bears of Fallout exist in a category of their own, found in beds, lockers, strollers, ruined nurseries, and, with some regularity, perched inside toilets. Teddy bears appear across Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and Fallout 76 in quantities that suggest the pre-war world was exceptionally well supplied with stuffed animals. Some of them are placed in ways that feel incidental. Others appear in arrangements that look deliberate, seated at small tables, propped against walls as though resting, or positioned beside skeletons with one soft arm extended toward the bones as though offering comfort across the divide between the living and the long since dead. Developers have confirmed that the bears were placed by individual level artists without coordination. meaning that a bear seated thoughtfully beside a skeleton was placed by someone who found the image worth creating, while a bear wedged inexplicably into a bathroom cabinet was placed by someone filling space. The community cannot always tell which is which. Players who find a bear beside a skeleton tend to feel something about it. They tend to stand there for a moment, then they move on with the bear still in place, never collected, never disturbed, still reaching. Deep in Fallout 4's subway tunnels, in one of the collapsed stations that most players pass through only long enough to fight whatever lives there, there is a small tableau tucked into an alcove at floor level. Two teddy bears sit facing each other across a flat surface, arranged as though in conversation or at a game. A third bear lies on its side nearby. No quest leads here. No holotape explains it. The scene simply exists at ankle height in a location designed for movement and conflict, waiting for anyone who looks down at the right moment. This was part of a development era competition among the environment team, a quiet game between artists to see who could stage the strangest or most affecting teddy bear scene in the most unexpected location. The competition was never officially judged. Its results are distributed across the Commonwealth in dozens of small moments, each one a private joke or a small gesture of warmth from someone who spent long hours building ruined spaces and occasionally decided to leave something gentle behind. The bears weigh half as much as a bottle of purified water, despite being roughly the same volume. This was a data entry error during the balancing phase that was never corrected. A developer noted during internal review that the bears must be made of light optimism. The note was recycled into an unused loading screen tip that never shipped. The bear remains light, and the optimism, such as it is, persists. The Vault Tech posters that appear throughout every vault in the series carry cheerful slogans and bright colors designed to reassure the people sealed inside. They show smiling families and clean hallways. They promise safety, community, and the future. What most players never see is that several of these posters, when their edges are exposed by moving nearby props or accessing the game's camera controls, carry text along their borders that has been printed in reverse. The reversed phrases contain messages that vary between light irony and something closer to paranoia, phrasing that sounds like satire of the institution that produced the posters, written in the font and cheerful colors of that institution's own public communications. The text was placed by the artists building the poster textures as a private joke. They knew the edges would be covered by walls and props in every intended placement, rendering the text invisible during normal play. When players using console camera tools found the reversed border text and decoded it, they treated it with the seriousness that Vault Tech's actual behavioral history warranted. A poster saying one thing on its face and something contradictory on its hidden edges seemed like exactly the kind of institutional doublespeak that the vaults were built upon. That the messages were designer jokes rather than lore made no difference to their reception. When the Pip-Boy's flashlight is activated in Fallout 4, the shadows in the immediate vicinity flicker briefly before settling. The effect lasts for less than a second, a fractional instability in the lighting engine as it recalculates shadow positions for the new light source. The cause is technical. The game treats the Pip-Boy's glow as an external dynamic light rather than a standard attached flashlight, which means the lighting system needs a moment to incorporate it into its calculations. The flicker is the sound of the engine catching up. What the flicker produces unintentionally is the impression of an unreliable device. The Pip-Boy's light hesitates before committing. For a fraction of a second, the darkness seems unsure about retreating. This is consistent with everything else the Pip-Boy does. It ticks when there is no radiation. Its radio cuts to static without reason. Its compass drifts slightly when not in use. The device that has guided every Fallout protagonist through 2 centuries of ruins behaves, in aggregate, like something that is doing its best under conditions it was not designed to outlast. The flicker is the Pip-Boy's equivalent of a deep breath before continuing. In Fallout 76, during rare weather transitions, a windmill in certain forested regions of Appalachia will emit faint music. The sound lasts only a few seconds and stops as soon as the player moves away. It carries no melody recognizable as any track in the game's soundtrack, yet it is clearly musical in structure. A few tones, organized rising slightly before cutting off. The source is an ambient audio code fragment from Fallout 4's Diamond City Marketplace, which had been incorporated into the Fallout 76 sound engine as part of a shared audio library. Under specific atmospheric conditions, this fragment activates on objects with certain rotation properties, and windmills rotating steadily in the wind occasionally qualify. The result is a windmill that briefly plays music when the weather changes. No one in Fallout 76 built a wind-powered musical instrument into the landscape of Appalachia. One emerged from the meeting of an old sound file and a rotating prop under conditions that no one anticipated. Players who have heard it and known what they were hearing have described stopping to listen, standing in the changed weather, while the windmill played its few quiet notes and then went silent. A machine that forgot it was a machine for a moment and sang. The rat stag, the mutated deer found across Appalachia and the Commonwealth, sometimes performs a brief jump in place before turning to flee from the player. The jump is small, a quick upward movement with no forward momentum, occurring directly before the animal's flee behavior activates. It looks, to most players, like a startled animal reacting to a sudden threat, the kind of prey instinct that evolution built into deer long before the bombs fell. The actual cause is a pathfinding glitch. When the flee behavior is triggered, the game's navigation system calculates the animal's escape route and begins moving it along that route. In certain terrain situations, the initial direction of the route conflicts briefly with the animal's current position, causing a reset, a momentary recalculation that manifests as a small upward displacement before the route resolves. The jump is the game working out where the deer needs to go before it can go there. But what the community sees is a frightened animal collecting itself before running. They see the hesitation of something alive, something that experienced a moment of alarm, and then made a decision. The pathfinding glitch produces behavior that looks more emotionally truthful than behavior deliberately designed to represent fear usually manages to look. The accident is more convincing than the intention. Inside the Institute in Fallout 4, rows of glass containers display preserved specimens connected to monitoring equipment. The specimens are brain models, identical in shape, differentiated by the labels attached to their containers. Most labels read as expected: test designations, control group identifiers, clinical notation. One label is different. It reads only M. Gray, a name presented without title or context, among containers that carry only clinical codes. No character named M. Gray appears in Fallout 4's storyline. The name connects to no quest, unlocks no dialogue, and serves no discoverable purpose. The most common interpretation is that it represents a developer's personal signature, the kind of small credit that people leave in textures and object names throughout the game. Fans have argued otherwise. M. Gray might be a patient. M. Gray might be a scientist. The container sits in its row with no more information than it was given. The name is enough to suggest a person and not enough to tell you who that person was, which is exactly the kind of detail that lives quietly at the center of Fallout's most affecting environmental storytelling. In Fallout New Vegas, the Novak gift shop sells a small selection of toy rockets and empty bottles. The vendor who runs the shop has a hidden set of dialogue lines, never triggering during normal play, in which he discusses an ongoing dispute with a supply manager over the state of his inventory. He has been waiting, according to these unused lines, for a shipment of real souvenirs for years. The shipment has not arrived. He does not know why. The lines were part of a larger conversation arc that was cut from the game during production. The dialogue tree still exists in the game's files, intact with the vendor's side of the argument fully voiced, and the absent manager's replies implied by context. What remains in the actual game is the shop, small, stocked with rockets and bottles, the vendor present and functional, selling what he has without ever mentioning what he was supposed to have instead. He has no idea within the game as it shipped that there are words in the code explaining his situation. He simply sells the rockets. He does not know they are a consolation prize. The mirrors in Fallout do not reflect. Every mirror in every Fallout title, in bathrooms, on dressing tables, on the walls of hotel rooms and vault dormitories, displays the same flat, non-reflective surface. The technology required to render real-time reflections in mirror objects was never implemented for standard environment mirrors, a practical decision given the processing demands it would have imposed. The mirrors were given gray surfaces to suggest the presence of a reflective material without actually reflecting anything. In Fallout 4, several of these mirrors emit a faint metallic light in certain lighting conditions, not a reflection, but a glow that resembles one at a glance. The effect comes from two texture shaders accidentally overlapping. The metallic surface shader applied to the mirror frame and the interior mirror surface have properties that, under specific angles of ambient light, interact to produce a low-level luminescence. Players who noticed these mirrors gave them a name and a story, a mirror that glows but does not reflect. In a ruined world full of rooms where no one has looked at themselves in 2 centuries, became a ghost mirror, something that remembered the idea of reflection without retaining its function. The mentats found in Fallout, the performance-enhancing chemical compound presented as a small tablet, change flavor in every game that includes them. In Fallout 3, the label identifies them as cherry-flavored. In Fallout New Vegas, the packaging describes them as mint. Fallout 4 provides an orange variety. Fallout 76 introduces a berry mentats variant that glows a bright and unsettling pink. The performance-enhancing effects remain essentially constant across all these flavors and all these games. What changes is only the description. No in-game document explains why the formula's flavor changes between regions and between eras. The most practical explanation is that different writers handled the item description in different games and made different choices without cross-referencing. The community's explanation is more elaborate. Some fans have developed entire theories about mentats manufacturers, about regional variants, about different distribution networks, about what the original formula tasted like before the war degraded the supply chains that brought it to market. A small inconsistency in flavor labeling has generated more lore speculation than many intentional mysteries. The pre-war advertising that decorates the walls of Fallout's ruined cities carries slogans that could have been written for a wasteland rather than for the consumers they were originally aimed at. A poster for Dandy Boy apples promises freshness that lasts a lifetime, which is true, in the sense that the apples in their irradiated state have outlasted everyone who was supposed to eat them. A billboard for Poseidon Energy claims power that never fades, which is true of the radiation that Poseidon Energy's facilities continue to emit 2 centuries after the company stopped operating. These slogans did not change when the world ended. They remained on their signs, delivering their promises to an audience that no longer existed, in a city that had already demonstrated the limits of those promises. The posters were designed as set dressing, reused assets placed to fill the visual space of pre-war commercial architecture. The irony of their slogans in a post-apocalyptic context was noticed early in development and generally treated as a quality rather than a problem. Sometimes practical decisions and thematic resonance arrive at the same destination by different routes. The Dandy Boy Apples poster was placed because there needed to be something on that wall. The freshness that lasts a lifetime has endured for 210 years. The claim checks out. The Nuka-Cola vending machines found throughout Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 display a small price label on their dispensing buttons. That price reads, 1 cap. Bottle caps did not become the currency of the wasteland until after the Great War, until the infrastructure of the old economy collapsed, and the bottling caps of Nuka-Cola, being durable, plentiful, and difficult to counterfeit, emerged as the default unit of trade among the survivors and settlements that followed. The caps were not currency when these machines were manufactured. They were literally the discarded metal seals of a popular beverage. The machines could not have priced their contents in caps before caps became currency. The labeling is an anachronism, a product of the vending machine model being designed for the post-war setting the player inhabits, rather than the pre-war context the machine was supposedly built in. It is either an oversight or a quiet joke about how completely the new economy has absorbed the artifacts of the old one. The machines, if they could speak, might observe that they were ahead of their time. They were priced in caps before caps meant anything, and now they exist in a world where caps mean everything, still dispensing their contents at a price that turned out to be exactly right. The physics of Fallout's world are inconsistent in ways that produce a specific category of gentle absurdity. A shopping cart, which should be among the lightest objects in any environment, a wire frame on wheels, holding nothing, can absorb a direct explosive impact without moving. A single empty tin can, meanwhile, will sometimes roll across an entire street without stopping, propelled by an invisible friction inconsistency that the game's physics calculations have assigned to it. Heavy things are sometimes light. Light things are sometimes immovable. The wasteland's relationship with mass is approximate. This inconsistency comes from how physics properties were assigned to objects during development, a process that was not always conducted with full attention to physical realism, because physical realism was not the goal. The goal was a world that felt right to navigate. Sometimes, an object needed to behave as heavier or lighter than it would be in reality to produce the correct gameplay feel. The shopping cart became essentially immovable, not because shopping carts are indestructible, but because the collision physics required for breakable shopping carts was more expensive than the benefit it would have. Provided, the can rolls because something went slightly wrong with its friction value, and no one cared enough to fix a rolling can. Players who watch a can roll indefinitely down a ruined Boston street and then push a shopping cart that refuses to move have found, in this inconsistency, a metaphor for the whole series. The immovable things stay. The small things go wherever the world takes them. In Fallout 4's creation kit, every raider leader has a name drawn from a randomly generated list of approximately 200 options. The list includes realistic post-apocalyptic names, Scar, Chain, Rust, and also includes names that are significantly less threatening. Toast appears on the list. Butter appears on the list. Sledge is there, which works, but so is Muffin, which raises questions about how that individual established dominance. There is, at the extreme end of this list's absurdity, a 1% chance that a raider leader will spawn with the name Dog, the same word used by companions to address the player's canine companion, Dogmeat. When a raider named Dog is in the vicinity of Dogmeat, the companion's dialogue system occasionally interprets spoken references to the raider as being directed at the dog. Dogmeat responds. He looks up. He wags or holds still or tilts his head, depending on the context. The developers were informed of this when it was discovered during testing. They left the name Dog in the list unchanged. Their stated reasoning was that the interaction was too charming to remove, which is a design philosophy that has guided a significant portion of Fallout's most enduring moments. The scientists of the Institute in Fallout 4 carry a voice line that plays during certain idle behaviors. Precision is our ally. The phrase appears in contexts ranging from laboratory work to combat briefings. It sounds like a motto, a slogan that captures something of the Institute's clinical, results-focused culture. It is none of those things. The line was written for a combat robot's behavioral loop, a phrase meant to accompany an attack robot performing targeting calculations in combat. Through an error in the voice line assignment system, the line was applied to a broader tag that included Institute scientists performing routine tasks. The scientists received a robot's battle cry and integrated it into their workflow without noticing. The result is Institute employees narrating their administrative and domestic tasks in the language of precision warfare. A scientist sweeping a corridor announces that precision is their ally. A researcher reviewing data files notes that precision is their ally. The Institute, the Fallout universe's most technically advanced organization, has accidentally distributed combat doctrine to its support staff. Whether this qualifies as a tragedy or a satire of institutional culture depends on how long you have been playing. The vertebrate rotors, the distinctive spinning blades of the Brotherhood of Steel's aircraft, produce a sound in Fallout 3 that is slightly out of synchronization with the visual rotation of the blades. The rotor animation and the audio loop were assigned different cycle lengths during production, creating a persistent, gentle offset between what is seen and what is heard. The blades appear to spin at one rhythm, while the audio suggests a slightly different one. The result is a faint hypnotic quality, a dissonance too subtle to identify consciously, but present enough to register as something slightly off. This mismatch was carried forward into Fallout 4 without correction. The same audio file, with the same offset from the same visual animation, continued to produce the same barely perceptible hypnotic dissonance in the Commonwealth. Across 2 games and 1 engine generation, the Brotherhood of Steel's aircraft have hummed in a rhythm that does not quite match their blades. No one fixed it. The aircraft cross the sky and the sound follows them, half a beat behind, like a shadow that hasn't quite decided where to fall. The collectible magazines of Fallout have interior text that was never finished. Every magazine that can be picked up and examined in the series shows a front cover of genuine quality, unique art, period-appropriate design, the specific visual language of its fictional publication. The interior paragraphs, visible when the magazine is held and examined closely, are placeholder material, the same sentence loops. Words appear that are not quite words. Some paragraphs contain nothing more than variations of a design template from decades ago, the kind of filler that designers use to show text without writing text. The prices printed on magazine covers were set by artists choosing numbers that looked correct for the period. A common choice across multiple publications is 73 cents, a figure selected for its aesthetic plausibility rather than any connection to pre-war inflation modeling. That price never changed across the series. Every version of every game shipped with the same cover prices on the same magazine models. In a universe where 200 years have passed since the last magazine was printed, the cover price of 73 cents has remained untouched by time. The apocalypse affected the supply chain, the editorial staff, and the entire world of print journalism, but it could not adjust the cover price of a pre-war magazine. The Boston bus stop benches visible throughout the ruined streets of Fallout 4's Commonwealth bear a faded advertising slogan on their backrests. The slogan is "Ride with Pride," a line taken directly from a real Massachusetts transportation advertisement used by the development team as reference material during the construction of Boston's urban environment. The words were included in the texture because they looked authentic. They were never replaced with fictional content. A real-world slogan now echoes in the ruins of a fictional city printed on benches where no buses have run for 200 years, inviting riders who are long past riding anywhere. Players who notice this tend not to know whether to be amused or unsettled by it. The real world and the fictional one have a relationship in Fallout that is always just slightly too close. The street layouts suggest real Boston. The harbor and the water and the ruined skyline reference real geography. And now a real slogan sits on a real-world bench design in a devastated fictional city, reminding no one to ride with pride on a transit system that does not exist. The sign was a practical choice. Its effect is something stranger than practical. Beneath the soil of Fallout 4's outdoor environments, the ground texture contains embedded text fragments. These are not messages or hidden lore. They are artifacts of the texture creation process. Copyright stamps applied to reference photographs, brushstroke marks from texture painting tools, initials from the template files used as starting points for the ground material. Zoomed in closely enough, letters become visible in the dirt, fragments of institutional names, utility markers, the ghost handwriting of a software interface that was present when the texture was made. The ground of the Commonwealth is, in its smallest detail, covered in the traces of its own construction. Every footstep in Fallout 4 covers invisible writing, not the writing of the fictional world, but the writing of the real world that built the fictional one. The wasteland was made by people who left marks they could not see on surfaces that were never supposed to be examined this closely. And yet the marks are there, pressed into the digital soil, visible only to those who look from an angle that no one intended and find what no one was supposed to find. The rat stag's antlers, those extra growths that distinguish the mutated deer from its pre-war ancestor, change slightly in color between the game's day and night cycles. During daylight hours, they carry a faint bioluminescent quality, a soft, barely perceptible glow along their edges that is not visible in photographs but registers in peripheral vision during direct observation. At night, the glow intensifies slightly, more like the residual shine of a phosphorescent material, absorbing and slowly releasing light than the active radiation that one might expect from a heavily irradiated creature. This was not designed as a lore feature. The bioluminescent quality emerged from how the antler's texture interacted with the game's dynamic lighting system under different ambient light values. In daylight, the ambient calculation produced a mild edge glow as a side effect. In lower light, that same edge glow became relatively more prominent against the darker background. The team noticed this during development, determined it looked appropriately eerie for a mutated animal, and left it without changing the underlying cause. The rad stag glows because of a lighting interaction, and the lighting interaction was left in place because the glow seemed right. The accident became the intention. In the Mojave wasteland of Fallout New Vegas, at the far northeastern edge of the accessible map, there is a mailbox. It stands alone in the desert, well beyond any road or structure, in an area the map has no reason to visit. It is accessible, openable, and contains a single item, a piece of pre-war junk mail. The junk mail carries a stamp that reads, "Final Notice," the kind of last attempt communication from a billing department that suggests the recipient has been ignoring previous correspondence for some time. The mailbox serves no quest. The junk mail has no use. The location contributes nothing to any story the game tells. The developers place the mailbox at the edge of the world without explanation, and the junk mail inside it without comment. Players who find it, reaching the edge of the map in a game already defined by finding things beyond reasonable expectation, tend to pause for a moment. Final notice, in a world where every notice arrived too late. The mailbox sits in the desert with its last message, delivered at last to no one, the postal system's final act of persistence at the edge of everything. In Fallout 76, some of the chemistry stations that spawn in abandoned facilities appear with completely empty shelves. Players who approach expecting to find crafting materials will find nothing. Bare surfaces, cleared out as if someone took everything useful before the world ended. But players who crouch beside these stations and look underneath the table surface will find a single bottle of Abraxo cleaner resting on the floor below. The bottle cannot be picked up. It is not classified as an interactive object. It is a static decoration piece that fell through the table surface during the cell's creation, a prop that was supposed to be on the shelf above. Misplaced by a pixel-level error in the placement grid, now resting permanently beneath the station that was supposed to hold it. For players who notice it, the bottle becomes something, a cleaning product that never made it to the shelf. A world half-tidied, interrupted before the job was done. The Abraxo cleaner that promised to eliminate germs no one knew existed has ended up on the floor beneath an empty table, out of reach, in an abandoned facility, in a world that ran out of time to clean itself up. It is, in its accidental way, the most honest piece of environmental storytelling in Fallout 76. In Fallout 4's Cambridge Polymer Labs, a terminal contains a log entry that reads, "Please remember to clock out before eternal sleep." The line was written by a developer who was composing the pre-war employee communications of a facility where the researchers were, in the lore, engaged in work of a particularly consuming nature. The dark joke was intended as gallows humor appropriate to the setting, the kind of grim but cheerful internal communication that people in demanding research environments sometimes use to acknowledge the extremity of their conditions. The joke was noted during content review as slightly too dark for the facility's tone and flagged for removal. The removal was not performed. The editor who flagged it did not follow through, and the line shipped in the final game. Today it sits in a terminal in Cambridge Polymer Labs, waiting for players who interact with the facility's computers, delivering its dark encouragement to everyone who reads it, and its small story about the gap between what gets reviewed and what gets shipped to everyone who knows to look for it. Please remember to clock out before eternal sleep. Several thousand employees apparently did not. In Fallout 2, a wall texture used in certain interior locations features handwriting that spells out a word when read directly. When the texture was created, the source photograph was mirrored during the design process to achieve the correct visual balance for the wall surface. The mirroring reversed the handwriting, turning the word it spelled into its own backward reflection. Data miners discovered this years after the game's release and decoded the reversed text. The word was help. The texture had been photographed from real-world graffiti, a piece of writing on an actual wall that someone had written with clear intent. When the image was mirrored and applied to a digital surface in a post-apocalyptic game, the cry became unreadable. It survived the process, but lost its meaning. It is, in the game files, still asking for something, still calling out in the only language available to it, just in a direction that no one can read. The apocalypse did not silence it, it only turned it around. The Enclave soldiers, whose terminals can be hacked in Fallout 3, are, by the fiction, among the most disciplined and ideologically committed military forces in the post-war world. Their terminals reflect this. They contain orders, operational logs, command structure communications. They also contain personal notes left by soldiers during downtime, tucked between the institutional entries in the way that people have always used private spaces to say what the official record does not. One message reads, "If you are reading this, the coffee is gone." Another, "Someone please feed the iBots." These notes were added to make the Enclave soldiers feel like people inhabiting a place rather than narrative functions occupying a location. Someone needed to write messages that acknowledged the small frustrations of institutional life, the depleted common supplies, the neglected machines, the domestic concerns that persist even in the most rigidly organized environments. The notes work. They produce in the terminals of one of Fallout's most imposing factions the impression of a break room. People who serve the Enclave drink coffee and worry about their robots like everyone else. The Nuka-Cola quantum bottles in Fallout 4 create an unusual light effect when placed near certain reflective surfaces. The blue glow that makes quantum distinctive, representing within the lore, the isotope that gives the drink its enhanced properties, produces a zone of negative light when its glow texture overlaps with the reflection shaders of nearby glass or metal surfaces. Rather than casting light outward in a normal radius, the bottle produces what appears to be a shadow brighter than the darkness around it, an area where luminescence and its absence have exchanged roles. This effect was not built into the bottle's design. It emerged from a shader interaction that no one anticipated during the quantum asset's creation. The developers who encountered it during testing described it as looking appropriately science fiction and decided not to correct it. The decision was aesthetic rather than technical. The effect was wrong by the physics standards of normal-like behavior, but it felt right for a beverage that was supposed to be unusual. The community, discovering the negative light independently, integrated it into their understanding of quantum's properties. The lore of the drink grew to include what the rendering error had accidentally suggested. Science fiction absorbed the science fiction accident and continued. Across every Fallout game, there is a crash test dummy somewhere in the final build. In the original Fallout 3, it rests in a location accessible only through non-standard camera positioning. In Fallout New Vegas, it floats beneath Hoover Dam in a way that no in-game character could achieve through normal means. In Fallout 4, it lies partially buried near a government test site in a section of the map where players have no particular reason to excavate. In Fallout 76, it lies beneath a bridge, clipping slightly through the geometry as though the world cannot fully commit to its presence. The crash test dummy was the development team's most basic physics testing tool, the object used to verify collision detection, ragdoll behavior, and explosive force calculations before any other content was ready. Every game in the series began with a crash test dummy, absorbing imaginary impacts so that the rest of the world could be built around it. Leaving the dummy somewhere in the final game, hidden inaccessible to normal play, present only for those who go looking, became a tradition. The dummy is the oldest resident of every Fallout world. It was there before the vaults, before the wasteland, before any story was written. It watches every finished game from the corner of the map where it was put away and never collected. The Pip-Boy's compass, when observed during a period of standing still in Fallout 4, drifts slightly to the left over the course of approximately 60 seconds of uninterrupted stillness. The drift is slow enough to be imperceptible unless the player is specifically watching for it, and it reverses back to the correct heading after a brief period, as though the device recalibrated itself. This was added by a programmer who wanted the Pip-Boy to behave like a piece of analog technology, specifically like the magnetic compasses of the mid-20th century, which were sensitive to interference and would occasionally produce small deviations from true heading before correcting. The compass drift changes nothing about navigation. The Pip-Boy's map and directional system are not affected by it. The drift is purely cosmetic, existing only in the animation of the compass needle as visible on the device's screen. Almost no player has ever noticed it because the conditions required to observe it, 60 seconds of standing still while watching a compass needle, do not occur during normal play. The programmer built a behavior for a device to perform in a situation that the game itself does not create. The Pip-Boy drifts unconsulted in the rare moments when everything is still. In Fallout 4, eating cooked meat produces a sound effect that is not the sound of eating. The human chewing sounds recorded during production were determined, after extended testing, to be too repetitive when triggered repeatedly during gameplay. Each piece of food consumed activated the same brief audio clip and across an extended session of resource management and crafting. The repetition became noticeable in a way that felt wrong. The sound team replaced the chewing audio with a processed campfire recording. A fire crackle, slowed to 3 times its original duration, approximated the textural quality of eating without the specific quality that made the original recordings tedious. The practical consequence of this decision is that every meal consumed in the Commonwealth sounds, at a level of remove, like fire. The specific quality that fire crackles share with the sound of eating, something about rhythm, about irregular small impacts against silence, is enough to register as plausible in context. Players do not think the character is eating a campfire. They simply do not think about what the sound is, which was the goal. But somewhere in every inventory management session in Fallout 4, someone is technically consuming fire, slowly, one rat away and one mole rat steak at a time. In Fallout 3, a terminal exists in an unused office cell that carries the label Todd's Password Test. The terminal functions normally when accessed. It is a functional computer with a difficulty rating, a password prompt, and readable interior content. It exists in a location that cannot be reached through normal gameplay, appearing only in cells that were used for testing during development and were never connected to the accessible map. The name Todd, applied to a password test terminal in an internal testing space, is generally understood as a reference to the studio's creative director. In Fallout 4, the same testing culture produced a set of objects labeled with names that were clearly not intended as serious designations. A light switch in a test cell is labeled Light Switch of Destiny. A chair in the same cell is the Chair of Infinite Comfort. These titles appear only in the game's files, readable only to those who look at asset data rather than at the game itself. They are the equivalent of a sticky note left on a prop, a small acknowledgement between the people who made the thing that the thing, for the duration of its creation, had a name that made someone smile. The Wasteland's most comfortable chair has no location the player can find. It exists only in its name, which is, for a chair, enough. In Fallout New Vegas, the pool halls and recreation spaces of the Mojave contain billiard tables with balls that appear numbered from the distance at which players normally encounter them. The numbers are implied by color and positioning. The arrangement of the balls on the table suggests a set of 16, each distinct. Examined at very close range, using camera modifications or specific angles the game's interface does not normally provide, every ball looks identical. The resolution of the individual ball model breaks down at scales smaller than normal viewing distance, revealing that the variation between balls is an illusion produced by the overall arrangement rather than by differences in the individual objects. The billiard balls of the Mojave are individuals from a distance, and a single object repeated 16 times up close. This is not meaningfully different from how many things work at the level of casual inspection versus detailed examination. The distinction appears genuine until the conditions that sustain it are removed. Fallout. New Vegas has accidentally reproduced, in a set of low-resolution billiard balls, a principle about the relationship between observation distance and perceived individuality that applies in contexts well beyond video game asset management. The Institute scientists, the Brotherhood of Steel Soldiers, the Railroad operatives, and the Might Men who populate Fallout 4's factions are each built on AI frameworks that include idle conversation behaviors, lines they will speak when not in combat, not being addressed, and not otherwise engaged. Some of these lines were written with faction-specific voice and vocabulary in mind. Others were inherited from shared dialogue libraries that predate the specific faction's conceptual development. The result is that characters within highly distinctive factions occasionally say things that belong to a different institutional culture. A Brotherhood of Steel soldier, recorded as a stern technophile, may, during idle behavior, deliver a line about the importance of community that sounds more like something from the Minutemen's founding philosophy. An Institute scientist may offer a sentiment about the value of free knowledge that contradicts everything the Institute stands for in practice. These lines appear only in idle contexts and pass quickly enough that most players register them as ambient noise rather than dialogue. But they are there, small remnants of a shared human vocabulary that no faction has fully sorted into their own exclusive property. Survivors of the categorization process, still speaking in ways that no longer quite belong to them. The Protectron robots of Fallout carry, within the game's code files, a feature that was never activated in any released game. In Fallout 3, the code includes a system for equipping Protectron units with pre-war headwear, hats, caps, various forms of cranial decoration that could have been applied to the robots as customization options. The feature was intended as a joke implementation during an early development phase and was cut before any version of it reached playable testing. The code remains. The hats remain in the relevant asset files, technically assigned to the Protectron model category. The menu to access the feature does not exist. The robots of the Capital Wasteland, the Mojave, the Commonwealth, and Appalachia are all technically capable of wearing hats. They have been capable of wearing hats since 2008. No player has ever put a hat on a Protectron through normal means. The feature was built, abandoned, and preserved in a state of perpetual readiness, a robot fashion system waiting for a permission that never came. In a game that shipped without it, surviving in the files of every successive title as a possibility that no one removed and no one used. The music of Fallout loops imperfectly. Several tracks used in the ambient and exploration soundtracks cut before reaching their final notes. The music ends slightly before its natural conclusion, leaving the last phrase unresolved before the loop begins again. This was a deliberate choice in some cases, made to allow smoother transitions between the end of a track and its beginning. In other cases, it was an editing artifact. The track was trimmed for file size or timing reasons without full consideration of where in its musical structure the trim occurred. The effect across hours of play is music that sounds like it is always on the verge of saying something it never quite gets to say. The melody approaches a resolution and then begins again from the start, and the resolution is postponed indefinitely. In a game about a world that was interrupted mid-sentence, civilization reaching towards something and then cut short, music that perpetually defers its own endings has a quality of rightness that exceeds what anyone might have planned for it. The imperfect loop is the correct loop. The unfinished cadence belongs here. In Fallout 76, dead enemies in specific circumstances stand up briefly after their death animation completes. The standing occurs because two animation systems conflict. The faction death behavior, which triggers a standing posture in units classified as military, and the ragdoll physics system, which should immediately supersede it. When the conflict resolves incorrectly, the unit stands, often with arms slightly raised and posture upright, before the physics system wins the argument and the body falls for a second and final time. Players who observe this call it the patriotic farewell, the sequence, a sudden return to upright posture, a brief moment of apparent coherence, then the final collapse, has a quality that transcends its technical cause. In a game full of things that died but did not entirely know they had died, an enemy that stands up again to deliver one last salute before falling fits as naturally as any lore the developers intentionally wrote. The bug became a behavior, and the behavior became a piece of Fallout that feels, in its particular way, earned. The Nuka-Cola machines throughout the series are labeled with a safety warning on their rear panel. The warning, printed in the small bureaucratic font of a pre-war regulatory compliance notice, includes an instruction prohibiting the insertion of various items into the machine's coin slot. The list of prohibited items includes foreign currency, jewelry, and rodents. The warning is positioned on the back of the machine, the side that faces the wall in every placement the game uses. It cannot be read during normal play. Accessing it requires passing the camera through the wall behind the machine, or using modification tools to move the machine. Someone wrote the warning. Someone specified that rodents needed to be prohibited from the coin slot. Someone determined that this level of specificity was necessary for a safety notice that would be printed on the back of a machine facing a wall in a post-apocalyptic game about nuclear war. The notice has been on every Nuka-Cola machine in every game since it was written, faithfully advising against rodent insertion, delivering its warning to the wall. As the quiet gathers now, and the details begin to blur at the edges, the way details do when the mind starts to drift, there is something worth resting on before the narration slows entirely. The wasteland is full of things that do not matter. Objects without purpose, sounds without meaning, accidents without correction. These are the facts that this journey has moved through, not the great arcs of faction wars, or the decisions of powerful people, but the small and the strange and the wonderfully unnecessary. They accumulate into something. A world that glows in places it was not meant to glow. A world where toilets endure and clocks freeze and two-headed cattle stare northward. A world where sound engineers hid the word boom in a mine's countdown. Where a robot wanted to sing lounge songs in a room that was never finished. where someone left a message inside a hollow dinosaur and labeled it marker for fun. These are not the facts that change anything. They are the facts that make everything feel inhabited. Evidence not just that a world was built, but that people built it, and people always leave traces of themselves, even in the code, even in the textures, even in the small accidents they decided not to fix because the accident was funnier than the correction. The wasteland holds all of this. Every dropped pencil, every floating sandbag, every glowing refrigerator that illuminates nothing. The world is broken, and the world is full, and those two things have never, in 200 years of the Fallout universe, been contradictions. Let the mind rest on that. On a Nuka-Cola bottle, glowing for the wrong reason. On a boy in a cave who will never stop planning to be president. On the sound of a mind that says boom before it says nothing at all. The quiet is here now. The facts have settled like dust, and the wasteland, which has been waiting patiently through all of this, is still out there. Enormous and ruined, and full of things no one needs to know, that everyone eventually discovers anyway. Thanks for watching. If you felt calm wandering through these soft moments, there's another video on the left of your screen. Maybe let it play as you settle in. It might guide you into an even deeper rest.